Welcome to the Sherdog Radio Network preview for UFC 282, Blachowicz versus Ankalaev. And if I wait another second, maybe that headline fight will change again. We don't know. Let's jump in and get this while we can. I'm your host, Ben Duffy of Sherdog.com. With me, as always, is Keith Shillan, the executive producer of the Sherdog Radio Network. Keith, how are you doing this evening?
Yeah, I'm excited. Always excited to talk UFC pay-per-view. Anytime we get the best fighters in the world going at it, that's always exciting. But before we get into that, Ben, and I didn't ask you how you're doing. How are you?
I'm doing great. Yeah, thank you.
I think we have to apologize. I know we've kind of skated around this for a couple of days now, but I think we have to apologize to all the listeners, all the MMA fans out there. There's a big gambling controversy going on.
A scandal, one might even say. Yes.
A scandal, yeah. And the news is many betting different commissions and stuff and not taking bets.
Yep.
So me and Ben apologize that we gave such good advice that now they won't take bets on UFC. That's what happened, right?
Yep. We killed it. We killed
There's nothing else going on, right? It was us just giving out who's going to win fights.
Yeah. We apologize. We're sure this will get sorted out soon. This is, of course, the final pay-per-view event of 2022. It's the second to last UFC event period. And once that's done, really the last major card to go this year will be the Bellator Rizin Extravaganza on New Year's Eve in Japan. So we really are winding down the year. In my duties as a Sherdog editor, I'm already kind of tidying up the lists of candidates for year-end awards to send those out to our staff for votes so that we can get those articles written. Just feels like another year coming to an end here. I was taking a look back today. This will be the 12th UFC pay-per-view of the year. The UFC have settled in on a pattern of doing them on more or less a monthly basis. 12 is about average for the last few years. Without thinking about it, do you remember what the first UFC pay-per-view of this year was? Well, I mean, you can think about it without looking it up.
Okay, all right, first of January. Okay. Thinking January, I'm thinking Adesanya defending the belt, maybe Adesanya Whitaker.
The first one of the year was headlined by Francis Ngannou and Ciryl Gane.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah, I should have known that. It was on my birthday. My wife threw a big party for me and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and it had Davison Figueiredo and Brandon Moreno as the co-main event. Obviously, the main events of this card changed at the 11th hour. It had been scheduled to be Yuri Prochazka and Glover Teixeira rematching for the belt that Prochazka won from Teixeira back at UFC 275. Prochazka suffered a shoulder injury in training a couple weeks ago, severe enough that reportedly, he was told by his doctors he could be out for a full year. We know the UFC well enough to know that, well, that's easy. They throw Teixeira in there against the next guy for an interim belt, and that becomes a de facto title eliminator for whenever Prochazka's back. That's standard procedure, and that's one of the situations where nobody blames the UFC at all for that. That's what you do. But that's not what happened. Yuri Prochazka relinquished the belt. He kind of forced the narrative. He's like, no, the belt is meaningless if I can't defend it. The interesting thing that happens is Teixeira then declines to take a short notice change of opponent. They were going to have him take on Magomed Ankalaev, and he's like, no, I'm not doing that on that short of notice. What are your thoughts on that situation, on his decision?
So it's such a tough situation. So UFC, first of all, good of Yuri Prochazka if they're reports are true that he willingly gave up the belt, that it wasn't forced out of him. He wanted to do like the honorable thing. Good on him. So hats off to him. As far as them doing an interim title or doing the real title, they really had no choice. I mean, at the end of the day, say what you want about sports, it's ultimately it's a business. They have so many shows they have to put on, contract with ESPN and try to make the biggest fights, and making the fight a title fight obviously makes it bigger, makes this main event bigger by throwing the title on it. So that okay. As far as Glover Teixeira turning down the fight, he's gonna do what's best for him. And if he thinks, being at his age, that not fighting Ankalaev now and trying to fight him 2 months from now would benefit him, yeah, of course he should do that. And he's been around long enough, and he kind of has that clout where he can say no, and I don't think it's going to be really held against him because he's been around. That said, supposedly, and I don't know how true this is, I didn't really follow that well, did he say only no to Ankalaev?
What I understand is that he was offered Ankalaev and said no.
Okay.
Like there wasn't another option given.
Okay, because would he have done Jan Blachowicz, guy he's fought in the past, he's beaten him for the title?
I'm sure he would have been happier to do that, yeah. But
because if he would have done that, why not just do that fight? It's not like Ankalaev is this huge, he's not Shemaev. He's not this Russian guy who's getting all this hype, and no. That's why you're trying to get him the title shot. Like he's
of the four guys in this picture, he's the most unknown. He has the least personality, which is saying something. Yeah, it's kind of interesting that Ankalaev of everybody is the person that tried to shoehorn in, and talk about having trained an entire camp for one thing only to get it switched up at the end. Could you get much more different than Yuri Prochazka and Magomed Ankalaev?
I would say, yeah, I know. Yeah, they're definitely different. One guy's a wild man. One guy's very tactical. One guy throws technique out the window, and it's about create. I mean, obviously he does have good technique, but it's about wildness and creativity. While the other guy's very, he's good at the minor details, and that's why he wins. I just think the only thinking I can think of not trying to just bump Jan Blachowicz, who's a bigger name than Ankalaev, that he's more marketable with the Polish power thing. He has like a little bit of a charm to him, is the fact that we've recently saw them fight and Teixeira won, but we also recently saw Teixeira and Yuri Prochazka, which we were trying to do. And again, now that was the fight of the year candidate, came down to where one guy's winning to the very end. So I understand it's not perfect comparison. Does a Glover Teixeira versus Jan Blachowicz, does that sell less pay-per-views than this one will?
I think they're going to be about the same.
Yeah, that's my point.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Is this just a nod to Ankalaev probably being a little overdue?
It could be. But they don't think of things like that. Like both Leon Edwards.
Yeah, you got a good point. Having said that, I look forward to this fight more than I would Teixeira versus Blachowicz.
Yeah, I like them. I like Glover Teixeira so much.
So do I. And
as a
Teixeira,
person,
Yeah, no, as a person, it's impossible not to like him.
Yeah.
I mean, he's the only fighter from New England you'll say nice things about. And again, one of the big dynamics in all of this is if he was 32, none of this would be that urgent.
Yeah,
but he's 42.
That's true, and obviously I wanted Glover Teixeira in there because then New England would have two champions from the if he won, we'd have two champions from the region. We'd have the light heavyweight champion and the middleweight champion from New England. So kind of slowly taking over the sport.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Right now, people are thinking, "Who's what?" Yes, Alex Pereira. We've adopted Alex Pereira as a New Englander.
Alex. Alex the Chowder Pereira is your middleweight champ. Like,
he's wicked good.
Yeah. Obviously, the UFC did what it could to throw together a main event in enough time. It's still not the worst UFC pay-per-view main event of the year in my mind. I mean, we've had something that was headlined by Colby Covington and Jorge Masvidal that just
but they could sell that one. That's the thing.
No.
Yes, X's and O's. Yeah, like top guys in the division. But the worst headlining, and again, you could sell this one, but it's got to be Nate Diaz and Tony Ferguson.
Yeah, Diaz and Ferguson, which again, they did what they could at the last minute. And, Diaz Chimaev wouldn't have been especially better. It would have been probably the most lopsided. Well, no, we talked about this on the preview because we did the regular preview and then we ended up doing that last minute preview. It had to be the widest betting line on a men's UFC pay-per-view main event in years. I forget what the actual stat was, but without any Valentina Shevchenko or Amanda Nunes in the equation, like for a men's main event, it was ridiculous. Like somebody was like a minus 800 favorite or something. How do you feel about this card overall quality, like south of the main event, like not judging it by that?
Yeah, like the overall. So ranking it for pay per view, I give the entire card like a C minus. It's not a good pay per view card if we're being honest. I know other preview shows will try to keep the listeners here, and we don't do well of selling our product. Like this card sucks. So stick around for 2 hours, 2.5 hours to watch our previews.
What I understand from our listener base, though, is they look forward to hearing us kind of dig at the bad cards almost as much as they want us to praise the good ones.
There's a couple of good fights. I mean, obviously, Mitchell Topuria, that's a really good fight. I think Till and Duplessis is a good fight. Paddy Pimblett's always exciting. There's a couple of guys here and there, but it's not a
the undercard feels like a fight night undercard.
Yeah, honestly, the whole card feels like a fight night, like a good main event. And if this was, if you took away the title,
oh my
just
goodness,
had it a non-title, 5-round main event.
You are 100% right. That's it. This is a fight night card with a title fight or a title slapped onto the main event. And if this was a fight night card, they probably wouldn't have Pimblett on there. So make it a 12 fight card. And like Lawler and Ponzinibbio is your co-main event, or Till and Duplessis is your co-main event. And yeah, this is a good fight night card. Yeah, that's a good way to call it. A lot of undefeated fighters on this card. Some O's are going to go from the very first fight, Cameron Saaiman versus the last minute step up, Stephen Koslow, all the way up to, again, you mentioned Mitchell and Topuria in a fight that kind of sounds like the future of the featherweight division, at least until these guys move up to lightweight, which we'll get to in a minute.
Which might be really soon for Topuria.
Which, ironically, since Topuria is like 3 inches shorter. But also got a number of guys on here who either their back is against the wall or they like have a ton of negative momentum and are really trying to bounce back. I mean, Edmen Shahbazyan versus Dalcha Lungiambula is
yeah. That's shit.
I mean, that's one of those cut them both fights if the fight's not good. I mean, I don't have a whole lot more to say about this one. Do you want to just start digging into these prelims?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. First up at UFC 282 is a bantamweight matchup between two undefeated debuting fighters in Cameron Saaiman and Stephen Koslow. Saaiman, the 21-year-old from South Africa, is a perfect 6-0 as a professional mixed martial artist. He's joining the UFC out of an August appearance on Dana White's Contender Series, where he knocked out Josh Wang Kim in the 3rd round. Prior to that, his entire career had taken place in EFC, probably Sub-Saharan Africa's top promotion. He's going to get his chance to debut at the big show against Koslow, who steps up for Ronnie Lawrence on about a week's notice, maybe 10 days. Koslow, 25-year-old from Florida, also 6-0 as a pro. He, has fought almost his entire career in Combat Night, which is kind of a mid-tier Florida promotion would be a good way to put it. I believe they're based in Miami, but definitely in that area. Odds here, Saaiman a comfortable favorite. He is minus 275. Koslow plus 230. Keith, you and I have been doing these shows together for a long time. For fighters that we've talked about, 4, 5, 6 of their fights, I have a general idea what your notes look like. I can look at a card and tell which people are going to take up most of my tape study and therefore probably most of yours. I said to you flat out when we were doing the UFC Orlando recap last night, I'm like, well, time for me to go watch some Steven Koslow fights.
Yeah.
I did so. He fights like you would expect from his record. I mean, it's all of his fights so far have been first round submissions. He's a pretty good sized guy for the division. He doesn't, I don't know whether he has an amateur wrestling background to me, but to me, he doesn't look like a former college wrestler, but he's been effective enough at getting the quality of guys he's been fighting to the ground. Once down there, he is a 10th Planet guy, and he has a little bit of that to him. I mean, it's not as idiosyncratic as like the California 10th Planet guys where, that's kind of where like Rubber Guard came from. A lot of those people are Eddie Bravo students or like one generation removed from him. But he's definitely, like a bit of an unorthodox grappler, good back takes. The problem for me is he has fought absolutely dismal competition. I mean, he hasn't fought a single guy with a winning record. He was still beating like 0-0 guys and 0-1 guys when he was like 3-0, 4-0.
So he's saying he's smart.
He's very smart. And for what, again, anyone watching this, I'm not knocking it. One thing I think MMA should take from boxing is if you're a promising prospect in boxing, you're not going to fight anyone with a pulse until you're about 15-0.
Yeah. And
you get in your reps.
Yeah. If you're a has-been podcast that do the same thing.
Like, I mean, I don't know how Keith feels about it, but later up this card, I'm going to praise the UFC for putting together Michelin Topuria at about the right time. Okay. But by boxing standards, it would be like, why are you smashing these two prospects up against each other? They're only 15-0 and 12-0. Like, they shouldn't be fighting each other until it's at least for one of the minor belts. So, yeah, I'm not knocking it at all. Like, Koslow is being brought along very sensibly, but here he's going to have that dynamic that I've referred to before, where you're trying to merge into the freeway, like freeway traffic. It's going 80 miles an hour, and you're trying to merge in on a bike. And that first merge, he's going to get run over, man. Like, Saaiman is a promising fighter. He's a standout athlete. And he's fought better competition. Like, this is going to be a bit of a shocking moment, I think, for Koslow, and it will remain to be seen how he actually looks as a prospect. I don't think this fight is actually going to be a great indicator of it. Just if I had to guess, I'd say Saaiman is probably going to knock him out in the second round. I think Saiman's going to be better than him on the feet. I think he's going to hurt him on the feet. I don't think that Koslow is going to be able to take him down the way he wants. So by the second round, he's going to be hurt, and we're going to be looking at things like desperation takedowns, maybe guard pull type stuff, and Saiman's just going to probably pound him out on the ground. So give me Saaiman by a second round TKO here. But again, somebody's O has got to go, and it doesn't mean Koslow is busted as a prospect. Just this is sooner than his handlers were probably figuring. He looks like a guy that might have done well to be on the Contender Series next year once he's like 8-0 or 9-0, but he's not going to get that chance. Go time is down.
Yeah. So these guys are really young. You look at pictures of Cameron Saaiman. He's 21. You look at pictures of him, he looks like he's like 8 years old.
Yep.
Like he's so young looking. It's like he looks like the Sherdog fighting pictures. Like looks like a guy like he's playing high school basketball and he hit like a 3-pointer and he's like his girlfriend's in the stands and he's like like get all pumped up. He's a southpaw, but he switches stances a lot. So he kind of fights from both angles. I think he's better than southpaw. High volume. He throws a lot of combinations. I like. He really steps into his shots. Being only 21 years old, he already has some pop, which I like. His left hand is probably his best strike, especially from the southpaw. I actually like his like lead right hook. Kind of leaps into it. He throws a lot of kicks, targets the calves. He throws a lot of spinning back kicks. He hit a hard one on the Contender Series. He can be a little bit of a stationary target, which will hurt him defensively. I like that he will wrestle, though I wouldn't say he's a wrestler. He's got weak takedown defense, but he is a submission threat. He has one sub in his professional career, but he's got a bunch as an amateur, and he's got good cardio from what I've seen. Now, Koslow's tough because I haven't seen too much film. There isn't a lot of film out there. Like you said, he's only 6-0. He's 25 years old, so he's actually the senior guy. He's a southpaw. He throws hard hooks, a lot of teep kicks. You mentioned he will wrestle, though he's not really tactical. He kind of overextends on his takedown attempts. When he gets to fight the ground, he looks to advance position. Pretty good back takes, good ground and pound. He's a serious submission threat. Every single one of his wins have come by first round submission, which, has you asked the question about his cardio, like how good is his cardio? We've never seen him go past the first round. I'm not as confident as you are in your pick. For some reason, there isn't much film on Koslow. So, yeah, he's beating up really bad competition, so he might not be that good, or he could be a guy who's really good who just got matched up against bad competition. Like, I have no idea. The other thing is, like, both guys are so young, so we don't even know. Just seeing them, 3 months ago to now could be much different. From what I've seen, it really looks like a striker versus grappling matchup. I'm leaning Saaiman too because I've seen how he handles the big stage. He didn't seem phased at all when he won the Contender Series, and obviously this is different now. You're on a pay-per-view. You're opening the card. Rowdy Arena changes things. He's faced the better competition. You said second round. I'm going to go third round. I'll see he gets a TKO in the third round.
All right. 2 picks without a whole ton of confidence for Cameron Saaiman to get it done against a late notice opponent. Next up at UFC 282 is a men's flyweight matchup between Vinicius Salvador, debuting, and Daniel Lacerda. You'll also hear him called Daniel da Silva. Salvador, the 26-year-old Brazilian, the protege of Marcelo Ribas, the head coach and also father of UFC women's flyweight Amanda Ribas, is 14-4 overall. This will be his UFC debut. He appeared on the Contender Series in August, where he knocked out Shannon Ross in the second round. That was his 4th straight win, so he does come in with a good bit of momentum here. He will be facing a man with very much the opposite momentum as Lacerda, also 26, also from Brazil, is 11-4 overall, and he is on a 3-fight losing streak since joining the UFC late last year. He has lost to Jeff Molina, Francisco Figueiredo, and Victor Altamirano. All 3 of those by finish. He has yet to hear the final horn in a UFC bout. His most recent appearance, the Altamirano fight, was at UFC 278 in August, where he got knocked out middle of the first round. So he almost certainly is fighting for his job here, and he is not favored to keep it, as Salvador is a -200 favorite in his UFC debut. Lacerda +170 on the comeback. Keith, I'm going to toss this to you first. I'm going to ask you a variation on one of the things that I will sometimes say. Does Daniel Lacerda do anything at a UFC level?
Yeah, like I think he's got good out. I mean, it's tough. Like I think he's got good output.
Well, it's worth noting that the people he's lost to aren't chumps. Yeah,
I think he's got good power. So I think he's got power. He's got some output. He is a submission threat. I think there's some things. He's got. Yeah, he's had a tough run. I just think he's a lower level UFC talent. So like, is he as good as the best guy in the regional scene? Yeah, probably not the best guys, but you know what I mean. Like the good guys in the regional scene. Yeah, like I think he deserves to be in the UFC. Want me to keep talking about him?
Yeah. Like, tell me, go
yeah.
And give me your take on the fight.
Yeah, I mean he's aggressive. I like that. He's an action fighter. He can fight out of both stances, very slip and rip style. And that's because he has, you asked this question, I think he's got good head movement. He definitely has some power. Every one of his wins are by finish, so he's exciting. He'll toss out some spinning attacks, but he's got defensive holes and he's got durability issues. I mean, he was hurt to the body by Victor Altamirano. I think he's a weak offensive and defensive wrestler. When he shoots, he'll shoot from way too far away without much of a setup. He is relentless to get in the fight, like to the ground. Like I give him that, and he's very physically strong. Like if he gets around the hips, he can slam his opponents, pick him up. Aggressive ground and pound. As I mentioned, he's a submission threat with 6 submission victories. But if you put him on his back, he plays BJJ. His fight against Francisco Figueiredo was a really bad performance where he was quickly subbed by Figueiredo, like the poor Figueiredo. He got ground and bound by Victor Altamirano. So he hasn't had good showings. He looked much better in the regional scene. So again, to answer your question, maybe he is a regional fighter. So that's concerning. He has slowed down in the past. Now, his opponent, Salvador, like this guy, I just talked about how much fun Lacerda is. Like Salvador is really fun. I mean, the guy's 25 years old. He's a southpaw. He's freaking huge for a flyweight. Like, don't be surprised if he misses weight. Like that very well could happen. He's a good athlete. He's got good footwork. He moves well. He's got a lot of flaws. He's just very unorthodox guy. He drops his hands and he throws these weird unorthodox angles. He throws from his hips, but he whips shots. He's really good at wrapping his punches around his opponents, like your normal, the high guard defense. He does good to go to the body. But the big thing about him is this guy has power at flyweight. He has 13 knockouts at flyweight. Even in the Contender Series, he dropped Shannon Ross twice before getting the knockout. He does some stupid. He's an entertainer. He does like some stupid capoeira style kicks that really don't work. But he's got good stepping knees. He'll throw a flying knee. But he's got some defensible. He's extremely hittable, and that's because he stands in front of his front. He just throws wild, like backyard boxing style punches, which obviously leaves him open to counters. He also does the thing. He actually tried doing it on the Contender Series, and he's done it in the past. He'll back up towards the fence and try to do that Anderson Silva thing against like Stefan Barna, where he just stands in and lets you like throw punches at him and then dodge some and then counter. But he ain't Anderson Silva, so don't get too excited about that. No, he's really young though. He'll get in the clinch. He'll work in there, but even though he slowed down the fight, he still got a big KO on the Contender Series. I hate everything Salvador does. I mean that in the technical sense as like a coach. I'd hate everything that he does, everything wrong. Throwing all these hooks is going to get this guy pieced up against a really good boxer. Lacerda has power, and Lacerda could put him down. I'm not crazy about his wrestling, but he's got the willingness to take the fight to the ground, so he could duck under a hook and take him down. That said, Salvador has a lot of confidence, which I always think goes a long way, and he hits really hard. I think Salvador catches him with a big shot. I'm gonna say Salvador keeps it rolling. I think he gets a first round knockout.
I'm with you here. Like, I expect that when we do the recap for this show Saturday night, Lacerda will be on our cut list. It'll be a confident pick where we think he's probably going to be on the UFC's cut list. I mean, 0-4 is 0-4. At some point, you are what your record is. But this doesn't feel like JP Bays, where he just looked lousy in all of his UFC appearances. You know what I mean?
You really got to kick JP Bays down. You really got to. I can just imagine it. I can just imagine the poor guy at home, like, really? Like, that's what I need too, man?
Like, on paper, based on the outcomes, Lacerda looks like the worst flyweight in the UFC, and he's just not by the eyeball test. He's had his moments in his only really lousy performance was the Figueiredo fight. As you mentioned, it was like not even the good Figueiredo. Like, he got destroyed by Patricky Figueiredo, as I would, you know. But aside from that, yeah, like an aggressive guy that I don't think he's got his weight cut dialed in, because I mean, he's a pretty big jacked guy. I mean, he's not as big as Salvador, but his gas tank has been a problem, and that's saying something for a guy who has yet to go 6 minutes in a fight in the UFC. Like, one thing a flyweight should have is endless cardio, and he doesn't. Yeah, this is... Salvador has his vulnerabilities. Lacerda could catch him, but if this is going to be a wild firefight, I'm picking Salvador. He's a bigger guy with more power. You mentioned he's got the confidence, and I think he just has more ability to finish the fight, whether it ends up on the ground or stays on the feet. So same as you, and I'm thinking Salvador gets it done in the first round. Give me a Vinicius Salvador to win by first round knockout, and maybe Amanda Ribas will be there with one of her tame squirrels.
Oh, I love Amanda Ribas. Speaking of weaker brothers, let me tell you. Let's do story time with Keith real quick. I have an uncle through marriage, so he's not my blood, but he's this Italian guy, and like imagine, Godfather 1, Luca Brasi. He's like Luca Brasi if Luca Brasi had like less intelligence. That's my uncle.
Oh,
he somehow became friends with Frank Stallone. Sylvester Stallone's like extremely like I don't know like they like A-list celebrities. Sly Stallone is. He's like W-list celebrity. Did like 1 or 2 movies in like the peak of Sylvester Stallone's popularity. But he'll like go out and fly out with them and hang out with them. And then he'll send me pictures of them two together. So and I'm always like, what? Send me a picture of you with Sylvester Stallone, okay? Not his best friend Frank Stallone. So there you go.
Next up on the UFC 282 prelims is a bantamweight matchup between TJ Brown and Erik Silva. No, not that Erik Silva. Brown, the 32-year-old from Arkansas, is 16-9 overall. He's 2-3 since joining the UFC out of the 3rd season of Dana White's Contender Series. He had been on a 2-fight winning streak coming into his appearance at UFC on ESPN, Sarukian versus Gamrot in June. That came to an end as he was defeated by Shillan Nerdembeka by unanimous decision. So he's going to look to get back on track against the debuting Silva. The 35-year-old Venezuelan is 9-1 as a professional mixed martial artist. His loss was in his second fight, so he's actually on an 8-fight win streak, leading right up to his appearance on the Contender Series in August, where he knocked out Anvar Boynarzov. Oof, I slaughtered that one in the first round, punching his ticket to the UFC. This one is close on the books. Brown, just a slight favorite, -115. Silva, -105. And since we're talking about lines, we might as well mention that this is another of the early iterations of what it's going to look like when Glory MMA and fitness fighters appear in the UFC, because Brown has spent his last several camps there. It's not quite as bad as it is for some of Glory's really homegrown talents, because the thing that happened with Glory MMA was they were a reasonably reputable Midwestern gym, and then around the beginning of the COVID return in the middle of 2020, they became this pipeline for short notice fighters to the UFC. And once that started happening, and once fighters started seeing it happening, fighters who wanted to get to the UFC started flocking to Glory, because they were like, oh, I can bypass the Contender Series completely and get a short notice fight in the UFC, where not only am I in the UFC already, I skip the 10-10 contract and I'm basically guaranteed a second fight because I'm doing the UFC solid. Oh, take me to Kansas City. And Brown was one of those guys. So he always had another training home. He comes from West Side MMA in Little Rock, Arkansas, where he trains under UFC veteran Rolly Delgado, guy from Tough 8. So it's not quite as bad as for some of the people that
it's not as bad if your main trainer is Rolly Delgado. This is not as bad.
Dude, interestingly, like Rolly has he's got a good thing going there.
Yeah,
obviously,
I'll take it.
But
you don't have to be the greatest fighter in the world to be usually it's not the greatest people that are the best coaches.
No, like Larry Bird was a terrible coach. So, for Brown, I think it just means he kind of quickly lost a couple of phone numbers, and stayed in Little Rock. But nonetheless, we'll see how it goes here.
I just picture Rolly Delgado and JP By just hanging out together. Like, what the fuck? Like, I hate these guys.
Silva, man, he's a 35-year-old who's just going into his 10th fight. His professional debut was literally on his 29th birthday. That is a late starter. And it's not like he's made up for lost time. He's not a guy who started fighting at age 29 and fought 5 times a year in the regionals. I mean, this is just his 10th fight. He's fought basically twice a year coming up. Interesting thing about him, if you told me, okay, this is a 35-year-old prospect from Venezuela, the last thing I would find myself saying about him is, you know what, he has good wrestling entries, but he's a pretty good wrestler. I mean, you look at his regional record, and it's got a ton of submissions, and you're like, okay, I can picture this fighter too, but, he's at least willing to employ, like actual shots from the outside, which is at least a nice change up to have from the kind of clinch, drag, trip type takedowns that you would expect. It certainly worked for him on the Contender Series. There's not a whole lot upside here. This is one of the lower level fights on the card. I mean, the card is pretty well structured that way, from bottom to top. It's in a pretty logical order, but I don't see a whole lot out of Erik Silva here. Like, Brown has at least been hanging at a decent level in the UFC. He's 2-3, but he's fought pretty decent people the whole time. He is a good grappler, and he has shown like solid cardio. Give me Brown to grab a submission late here. Brown by third round submission, gets back to 500 in the UFC, and just keeps that James Krause phone number lost. New phone, who dis?
Yeah, I wish let's go like straight Bobby Valentine. Like have him represent Fitness and Glory MMA, and have James Krause with like a mustache and sunglasses as he comes out and stuff. Or
dude, you remember Coming to America? Like John Amos had his like fake McDonald's thing where it was like McDowell's, and they had like the Big Mick was their sandwich, and they had the golden arcs. Like, do something like that.
Wait to hear this. I've never seen that movie.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and the other one that gets everyone all fired up. I've never seen Die Hard.
Dude, that's wild.
Yeah, I went to the I have to get that done one of these days. So yeah, that actually.
What kind of cop hasn't seen Die Hard? Dude, I'm giving you homework for the holiday season. I want to see you in mid-January till you see Die Hard.
I live it, brother. Anytime as a detective, I get a call at 2 a.m. I always think of like 7, and like when Brad Pitt takes the call, but I never have Morgan Freeman's voice like saying like he's got another one. That's what I always picture when I'm getting up. It's never as exciting. That actually sways. I don't want to say it sways me, but I didn't even think about the Glory MMA that when you have a close fight, like those are the little things that kind of you can kind of nitpick a little bit. TJ Brown, you mentioned he's a wrestle boxer. I'll say okay boxing, pretty fast hands, hard jab, throws a lot of like power, short hooks, crosses, throws a lot of kicks. He's got a sneaky high kick for a wrestler, though he has a lot of defense faults. He stands up tall with his chin high. He's been rocked so many times, like counter right hands, like crush him. Danny Chavez beat him up pretty bad in their fight. He is a good wrestler. He has a nice reactionary double. He chain wrestles well together. Top side grappler, good ground and pound. He is a submission threat. He kind of likes, he's a classic wrestler, head and arm choke, but he constantly chases submissions that aren't there and will lose position going for submission. So that's really concerning. And he seems like a guy that you mentioned he's fought some really good guys. He's also fought some bad guys, and he seems to like fight down to competition, which is concerning. Erik Silva.
You're saying having a good fight with Charles Rosa is not a good thing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, There you go. And Charles Rosa to the Rolly Delgado JP Bice group. We're slowly getting a whole clan against us. Eric Silva. He's already the good Silva. Eric Silva already without even fighting in the UFC. He moves well on the feet. Switches stance a lot, fights out of both stances. Good jab. I like his right hand. Throws a lot of kicks, but he has, and seems like a theme tonight, a lot of defensive holes, keeps his chin high in the air. He does have some good kicks. Actually, I just said that twice. I apologize. I hate that the guy's making his UFC debut at 35. The good thing, as you mentioned, is that he's not a guy who's been on the regional scene forever with 40 fights and just kind of gets a lot, short notice call. Like, he doesn't have that years of getting beat up and stuff, wear and tear. So it's like he's like a young 35, if that makes sense, or like a used car but with like low miles. Like, it's a 2003, but it only has 85,000 miles.
Eric Silva was owned by this little old lady that just took it to the grocery store and to church on Sunday.
Right.
He's absolutely cherry. Like, you're getting a great deal here.
Yeah, it still runs great. They just they don't really use it. So you're a little higher on the wrestling line. I see he's an okay wrestler. Pretty fast entry. I don't think he has that. I think he's like a Mark Diakese wrestler where he doesn't have the second and third move after that. They have to initial explode through. Hard ground and pound though. And you mentioned he's a submission threat. He had 4 straight rear naked choke submissions. So I'm not confident in my pick, but I'm also going Brown, which is also why I almost thought about flipping it because of not having James Krause. Silva's good. Like, Silva shows himself, and they both have moments on the feet, but they both generally, and especially Silva, want to get the fight to the ground. And Brown has made it a lot easier than times you think. But on paper, Brown should be the better wrestler. I see he counters some of the attacks, lands himself on top, spends a lot of time on the top position, putting Silva on his back where he doesn't want to be. He wants to be. They're both kind of topside grapplers. I think he lands some ground and pound. I'll say Brown by decision.
Okay, Keith, there are not many rules on the Shillan and Duffy show, but one rule is, after a Mark Diakese fight, we don't talk about Mark Diakese for another 3 months. Like, that's the only good the silver lining in the cloud is, after his fight, we don't have to talk about him until 10 days before his next fight. I expect better out of you, man.
That's my least favorite fighter of all time.
We head now to the men's featherweight division, maybe, for a matchup between Billy Quarantillo and Alexander Hernandez. Quarantillo, the 33-year-old Florida native, is 16-4 overall. He is 4-2 since joining the UFC out of the third season of Dana White's Contender Series. Prior to that, he tried to get into the UFC through the 22nd season of The Ultimate Fighter. He got eliminated there, went back and won some more fights on the regionals, came to the UFC through Tough. He lost his last time out. He dropped a unanimous decision to Shane Burgos last November. Prior to that, he had knocked out Gabriel Benitez in the 3rd round. He's alternated wins and losses in his last 4 fights. He's going to look to get back to winning ways against Hernandez, who is trying to right the ship, trying to get back some of that hot prospect shine by dropping weight classes. The 30-year-old Texan is 13-5 overall. He is 5-4 since joining the UFC back in 2018. He has alternated wins and losses basically since his second fight in the UFC. His last time out at UFC 271 this February, he got choked out in the 2nd round by Renato Moicano. Prior to that, he had knocked out Mike Breeden in just a minute and 20 seconds last October. We could go back, but it is a pattern of lose to a really good fighter, beat an okay fighter, going back almost to the very beginning. Here, dropping the featherweight might be contributing somewhat to these odds, because Quarantillo is a moderate favorite. He's minus 165, Hernandez plus 140. Keith, I think I've said this, or we've said this on these previews before. Hernandez was a bit a victim of his own success. He dropped into the UFC in early 2018. He was 24, 25 years old. First thing he did was knock out Beneil Dariush in 42 seconds.
What a great win.
He comes back 4 months later, and he beats Olivier Aubin-Mercier pretty handily.
Jeez, nothing that both those wins have aged.
Those have aged
tremendous.
super well.
Yeah,
and from there, again, the pattern is right there. He outclassed by a really good fighter. You know, got beaten bad by Donald Cerrone, got knocked out by Drew Dober, got dominated on the ground by Thiago Moises. You know, in between beating decent guys like Francisco Trinaldo. It's not a bad. He's not a bad fighter. It's one of the worst fights of all time, and he probably deserved to lose it, but it's a W. Chris Kritzmacher, solid mid-level UFC lightweight. Just, I don't know if there is a corner to turn, or there is, something to be fixed here. I think Alexander Hernandez may just be what he is, and he's the victim of unrealistic expectations based on his UFC debut and based on the eyeball test. And that's kind of where I'm going with this, because Alexander Hernandez, he's from San Antonio. He came up in Texas promotions like, RFA and LFA before they merged to become, or, RFA before it merged with LFC to become LFA. I've been face-to-face with him a few times. I've been to open workouts. I've been like 3 feet away from him. I've talked to him. He is one of the biggest lightweights I've met. He's not the tallest. In fact, he's almost exactly my height. He's like, 5'9". But dude, he is just, he's thick. He's got muscles on his muscles. It's very much the same thing as Dustin Poirier, where you don't get an appreciation for what a big dude he is from the tail of the tape. You have to be near him and just kind of see like how big his chest and shoulders are. And I understand that he's taken almost a year to do this, so maybe he's undergoing an actual physical transformation. He's doing like the Roman Dolidze thing and taking a little bit of time and retooling his actual physique. But I mean, we're talking about a guy that was literally in bodybuilding competitions when he was like 15. Like, he has been a jack dude forever. I'll be interested to see if he makes weight.
Some of us are like that.
Yeah. And I'll be interested to see if he makes weight, what he looks like. And a lot of that hinges on this, because Alexander Hernandez is already a guy with some impressive offensive tools. Like, he's not a great technical wrestler, but he has pretty good functional wrestling just because he's so explosive and so strong. He's not a sensational technical boxer, but it works pretty well because he just has a ton of power because he's super strong, but just has horrible defensive lapses, horrible failures in fight IQ, questionable gas. None of those things are going to be especially helped by dropping to 145.
Wow.
And he's taking, like, for the question marks that there are about Hernandez, you couldn't find much of a worse matchup for your first fight at 145 than Billy Quarantillo, like within kind of that range of the division. Like, obviously, yeah, Alexander Volkanovski would be a worse matchup, but if you're looking for a guy that's probably in the 20 to 30 range at featherweight,
a matchup that makes sense in your debut.
Yeah, dude, I mean, the thing that first put Quarantillo on my radar was outlasting and then taking over the fight against Spike Carlisle, who might as well have been the featherweight Alexander Hernandez. Yeah, like a jack dude who's explosive, came out like a house on fire, and had been thrashing people in the first round. Quarantillo survived that first round, took over when Carlisle got tired, and was doing pretty much whatever he wanted to him by the third round. That's what makes this, like, I think, a bad look for Hernandez for me. Tough as it is for me to, pick against a Texas guy, in fairness to me, he left Texas, moved to Factory X. He's a Colorado guy as far as I'm concerned. Give me Quarantillo by decision here. He at least wins the second and third rounds. He wins going away, where he's building in strength as Hernandez is flagging. And depending on how Hernandez looks, maybe Quarantillo even wins the first round. Maybe this is the clean sweep. But I think this will pretty quickly snuff out the idea of featherweight Alexander Hernandez. if we see him again in the UFC, and we certainly should. I mean, he is a good fighter. We'll probably see him at lightweight again next. Now, I could be dead wrong. I kind of went looking through his social media to see if like I was seeing any flyweight TJ Dillashaw pictures, where we were like, oh, holy shit, he's going to do it, isn't he? I didn't really see anything like that. So I'm open to being surprised, but I think we might just see a sucked out Alexander Hernandez and making a move that doesn't really solve anything. Tell me what you think.
Yeah, no, honestly, like I'm looking at my notes and a lot of times we say a lot of similar things, but you've said everything I'm saying, even the way they break them down. I mean, Hernandez, you have to judge him based on what we've seen at 155. Pretty solid boxer, pretty quick hands. He's accurate, does well to dart in and out of range. I love his left jab to the body, then his overhand right combination that he kept landing on Chris Guzmacher. But he measures a lot. He has power. I mean, he's good power. But he really at 159, he needed to like conserve some energy, kind of pick and choose his shots a little better because he'd start to slow down at 155. He's got powerful kicks. He does well to mix punches and kicks together. Underrated grappler, pretty good in scramblers. But if he's fading at 155, how's he going to look sucked down? And like you said, he's not a guy that had like a little bit of cushion on him. He's shredded. Quarantillo, I agree. I think he's the worst matchup. No, the one thing that worries about Quarantillo is one that he's been out for a while. He's been on sidelines with some injuries. That's always a little concerning because you never know what kind of like toll that takes on a guy. He obviously had that war against Shane Burgos in the fight. Like there's a guy who kind of not fights similar, but he's big guy, like stay in your face. That's not how Hernandez fights, but like that's a bigger guy, and the size wasn't the problem. It was just, I should say that Burgos is a really solid boxer and he hits hard. But Quarantillo, he's faced big guys before, so even if Hernandez sucks down and he fills up well, I don't think he's gonna like just go out there and completely outmuscle Quarantillo. Quarantillo he beats guys with high output volume. He beats people with pressure. He gets in the pocket. He unloads power shots. His overhand right is kind of his moneymaker. The one fight that concerns me is the Gavin Tucker fight. Gavin Tucker kind of bullied him back on his back foot. But if you rush things against Quarantillo can crack a little bit. He's a good grappler. He's got good entries. He chain wrestles together. He kind of has that mindset to get the takedown. He looked terrible against Gavin Tucker. I got to take this fight out. It's been a while, but other than that, he's a brown belt that he's very aggressive in his grappling. He might be a black belt by now, but last time I checked, he was a brown belt. He'll chase submission, so he'll lose some position trying to get a submission. But if you make a mistake, he's a submission threat. He's got 5 subs on his feet. He's really good at scrambling back to his feet. So you mentioned Hernandez. He was a big lightweight, dropping down to featherweight. It doesn't make any sense. We've seen him slow down in the past. I expect it to happen even worse. I see this exactly the same way you do. I see Quarantillo just outworking him, wearing him down, maybe even getting a few takedowns. And I think the deeper the fight goes on, the better and better Quarantillo gets. Quarantillo's 33. That was really surprising. He actually turns 34 this week. But just by chance, I just happened to see that.
It feels like he should be like 28, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like if you just said, "Hey, how's Quarantillo?" I'd been like, 27. Like he's like right in his prime. Like, oh, he's much older than I think. So that is concerning, but that's it. That's the only concern I have. I just think he outworks him. Like, give me Quarantillo by decision.
We head now to the middleweight division for a matchup between Chris Curtis and Joaquin Buckley. There are a number of fights on this card where there is an overall similarity between the two fighters I'm going to highlight. This is one of them. And this is a matchup between two gentlemen who only really caught their stride when they moved from welterweight to middleweight. They spent a good number of years as basically welterweight journeymen. Once they moved to 185, everything clicked, and here they are in the UFC in a fight where it might pick up a bonus, nobody's head is on the chopping block, and it has a good amount of divisional relevance. I mean, these are two guys that have either entered or at least skirted the top 10 in this division. So, yeah, Chris Curtis and Joaquin Buckley, congratulations on making realistic choices about your fighting weight. Curtis, 35-year-old Cincinnati, Ohio native, is 29-9 overall. He is 3-1 in the UFC. That one was his last fight. He dropped a unanimous decision to Jack Hermansson in July at UFC London 2. Prior to that, he had won his first 3 in the UFC against Phil Hawes, Brendan Allen, and Rodolfo Vieira. Had become, kind of one of the big breakthrough stories in the UFC over the last rolling year or so. He's going to look to get back on track against Buckley. The 28-year-old Missouri native is 15-5 overall. He is 5-3 in the UFC. He also lost his last time out, a unanimous decision loss to Nasruddin Imavov at UFC Fight Night Gane versus Tuivasa back in September. Prior to that, he had won 3 straight fights over Antonio Hoyo, Abdul Razak Al-Hassan, and Albert Duraev. So 2 gentlemen looking to get back in the win column. Buckley is a slight to moderate favorite to get it done. He is minus 150. Curtis plus 130. Keith, I'm going to toss it to you. Who you got in this one, and how do they get it done?
Yeah, this is a really good stylistic matchup between not top 15 guys, but probably like the next tier down. Buckley, I mean, when you think about him, the first thing you think about is just that insane athleticism. I mean, he's got arguably the greatest knockout I've ever seen in my life. He's such an explosive athlete. He's a southpaw that he's like a compact striker, keeps everything inside. Very like bob and weave style, which is it's rare in MMA. It's very similar, like guys do that in boxing. So it's kind of the people have a hard time.
Mike Tyson, yeah.
People have a hard time with that style. He uses feints really well to set up his power shots. I mean, you look at like the Jordan Wright fight was a one that he did really well to kind of keep Wright frozen, then land some big shots. He rolls with punches, which keeps him getting hit clean, but it does. I've never been a big fan of rolling with punches because it does score. But it also keeps you in position, keeps your feet underneath you so you can kind of set up your counter power shots. He has a great ability to land power shots in small spaces, like on breaks and stuff. He's also good at staying outside and then just darting into range really quick with that explosion and landing power shots before his opponent's really ready for an exchange. He loves his straight left. He's a kind of a unsung, unrated grappler. Like he'll catch a kick, get you down, get in the clinch, get some takedowns. He got takedowns against Razak Al-Hassan. He has been taken down in the past, but he showed some really improved takedown defense in his fight against Albert Duraev. When he's in tower, I mean, look at him. He can crack. He's got some good ground and pound, and he showed some improved cardio against Al-Hassan and even against Imavov in a fight that he was kind of getting beat up. Chris Curtis is the definition of just like a light bloomer. We've talked about this. He's a guy that he's much different than Erik Silva. He's battle tested on the regional scene, but while he's carries a lot of wear and tear because of that, he also has a lot of experience. He doesn't get overwhelmed in the moment. He is undersized. Luckily for him, he's going against Buckley, who is also undersized for welterweight. He's a southpaw. He's a pretty technically sound boxer. Like, he's much different than Buckley. Buckley's a way better athlete. They had an obstacle course. Buckley's winning by far. But Curtis is probably the guy you want to study more. He's very technically sound. He doesn't move well. He kind of stands directly in front of his opponent. But he needs to kind of learn how to pivot a little bit better. And we saw in the Hermansson fight, he needs to learn how to cut off the cage a little bit. He really struggled with the movement of Hermansson, and that'd be the best thing for Buckley to do, kind of not stay a stationary target. But if you get in the pocket with Curtis does really good. He keeps everything tight, everything short, tight uppercuts. He will rip the body. He's got sneaky power. I mean, he knocked out Phil Hawes, which at the time looked like a better knockout than it is. But Brendan Allen was a good knockout then and looks even better now. He doesn't kick. He's definitely more of a boxer. He also loves to shoulder roll. So you see a lot of Marvin Eastman get in the pocket, shoulder rolling. He deflects and stuff. He can wrestle, but he doesn't look for it enough. If anybody goes for a takedown, I'd actually expect it to be Buckley to go for a takedown. Mm-hmm. But if Curtis ends up top, he's a good grappler. He's got a good top game. He showed good takedown defense if he's trying to defend against like Adolfo Vieira. And he has the cardio and smarts to go 15 minutes. And the big thing about it is he doesn't waste energy. Not a lot of big loading up and stuff like that. This is a really tough pick. I think the line should be a little bit closer. Buckley's faster and he's a way better athlete, but Curtis is more technically sound. I flip-flopped on this pick because I kind of like both guys. But yes, even now I'm thinking about football. But I'm gonna go with Curtis. Curtis rips the body really good. I think he lands the better, tighter striker. And, I think he surprises another opponent with his pop and his technical skills. Give me Curtis by decision.
Yep, we're identical through 5 fights on this card. I've got Curtis as well in the mild upset. I love everything you put out there analysis wise, so I won't bother repeating all of it. But just to kind of go through a couple things with a highlighter, I do love that you pointed out how good Buckley is at generating power in tight spaces. Well, he better since he's the shortest guy in the division. But, we talk about his knockout of Impa Kasanganay being maybe the greatest knockout of all time. When you compare it to the other greatest knockouts of all time, I mean, if you're watching this, you can probably picture Edson Barboza knocking out Terry Edom with that wheel kick. And it is the most textbook, beautiful wheel kick ever. There's never been a better one in a movie. It's perfect extension, making full use of his long legs and just catching Edom's temple with like the tip of his heel. Like,
yeah, if you saw it in like the Karate Kid, you'd be like, come on.
Yeah, come on. Like if Jean-Claude Van Damme did that, they'd do it in slow motion like 3 times in a row, with a bunch of like dust flying in the air. Dude, yeah. Joaquin Buckley knocked out Impa Kasanganay, and that whole move would have fit in the phone booth. Like, they were within punching range when he did that. That's a half of what's so crazy about it. I do think that it's never going to be comfortable picking against Buckley. He has numbing, fight-changing power. Punches as well as kicks. Just, some of the best power, pound for pound, in the sport right now. But Curtis has got that veteran thing. You mentioned that he doesn't overthrow on anything and, just has good cardio because of it. I think that's also part of having come up from 170, where he was probably used to having to guard his gas tank more closely because of such a deeper weight cut. Now he's like, oh man, I got cardio for days. This is easy. Like, it probably just feels a little bit like cruising. I think if it goes to the ground, I think you're right that it will probably be Buckley who initiated it, but I think Curtis is going to get the better of things if they go down there. Curtis so far has, I was worried about his ceiling at 185 because of his stature. I mean, he's a little bit taller than Buckley, but just Buckley has grown into a person who physically couldn't make 170 anymore. Curtis probably could, but it just doesn't, it hasn't seemed to stop him. I mean, he stuffed Rodolfo Vieira's takedown game, and Vieira is giant. He effortlessly navigated the range against Brendan Allen and ended up knocking him out, and Allen is much taller and longer than he is. It hasn't bothered him yet. He lost to Hermanson, but it wasn't because Hermanson was that much bigger than him. Like, it's impressive. Like, even if Buckley flatlines Curtis in 90 seconds here, I still think 2 years from now, like, Curtis has a better chance of being in the top 10 of that division. Whereas Buckley's probably just going to hang around collecting bonus checks at a ridiculous clip, for as long as he sticks around. It's not a super confident pick, but I'm going with Curtis by decision here as well. I think he avoids the big bomb. I think he is the slightly fresher man in the final round, though, as you pointed out, Buckley's shown that he is capable of being there and being a factor in a fight in the third round, whether he's been winning or losing the first two. That is a heartening thing. But Curtis is a guy that actually seems to gather strength as his opponent fades. That was certainly the case in the Vieira fight. So, yeah, short of getting plunked, I think this is Curtis's fight to lose. Give me Curtis by decision here. Next up, it is the light heavyweights as Ovince St. Preux welcomes or bids a belated and somewhat tarnished welcome to the UFC to Antonio Trocoli. St. Preux, the 39-year-old Tennessee native who may have played football at some point, I'm not sure. Listen out for that on the broadcast. He is 26-16 overall. He is 14-11 in the UFC. He is 14-9 at light heavyweight. He had an 0-2 brief run at heavyweight. Didn't go well. He moved back down. He won his last time out. It was a split decision win over Mauricio Shogun Hua at UFC 274 back in May. He'll look to make it 2 in a row here against an ever-shifting cavalcade of short-notice opponents. He was scheduled to fight Philippe Lins. Lins dropped out. He was scheduled to fight Alexander Gustafsson. Gustafsson dropped out. In steps Trocoli. If that name is familiar to you, you'll remember why in a minute. The 31-year-old Brazilian is 12-3 with 1 no contest overall. He won his last time out. It was a first-round submission in Brazil regional show last November. But that 1 no contest was his appearance on Dana White's Contender Series back in July of 2019, where he choked out Kenneth Berg in the first round, and then it was overturned shortly thereafter when he tested positive for nandrolone. That was an episode of the Contender Series where the UFC extended contract offers to all 5 winners, Trocoli among them. The UFC rescinded that offer. It's not even like the Bruno Silva thing where they were like, okay, you know, go sit out your year or sit out your 2 years or whatever, and we'll take you when you're ready to go. No, like Dana was like, no, we're taking that back. He can go win a couple more fights somewhere else. He did so. Yeah. And here he is. I mean, short notice, 3 years later, it is what it is. It is a sign of how the public perception of Ovince St. Preux has fallen, of how public confidence in him must be, that this fight is a pick'em. Ovince St. Preux, -110. Antonio Trocoli, -110. Yeah. If I may invert Keith Shillan saying, Antonio Trocoli should not be even money with anybody in the UFC light heavyweight division.
Well, except for OSP.
Apparently except OSP. Something that you'll remember about Trocoli, if you saw him on the Contender Series, or if you're one of those weirdos that watches mid-level Brazilian regional promotions, as soon as he steps into
shout out to that guy.
Yeah.
There's another guy pissed off at us. Like, what'd I do?
As soon as he steps into the cage against OSP, he will at least be in a tie for the tallest light heavyweight in the UFC. He is 6'5", so he is right there with your Johnny Walker, your Kennedy Zechukwu types. And he's not this skinny rail. Like, he's a pretty big dude at 205. And what makes that even crazier is he used to be a middleweight, and he used to even be a welterweight. This guy has a loss to Jacob Volkman in LFA or LFC. Like, think about that. Jacob Volkman, the former UFC lightweight, and this guy fought. So, yeah, he competed on the Contender Series at light heavyweight. Apparently, getting off of steroids wrought some changes in his body, because his regional win in Brazil after that was actually at middleweight. So I guess he needed those steroids to keep some meat on his bones. I don't know how he's doing it now, but he is scheduled to fight at light heavyweight here. The problem with Ovince St. Preux is the fun is over. Those of you who know anything, it's
been on for about 5 years now.
Really, I mean, those of you, who read Sherdog, who read any of my work, know that I have an ongoing franchise called, the Hall of fucking awesome, where I will enshrine fighters who are or were fucking awesome, irrespective of how great they were as a fighter. Like, yeah, Kazushi Sakuraba's in there, but so is Drew McFedries, who, was never more than like a mid-level fighter at his very best. Just some fighters are awesome. In 2018, OSP would have been my active UFC fighter who was the biggest lock for the Hall of Fucking Awesome. Like, if OSP retires, he's in there a year from his last fight, because, just there was such wildness to it. Like, every fight you're like, well, I want to see what crazy thing happens here. And oh, by the way, he's actually doing it to top 10 fighters. It's pretty cool.
We got Huggy Bear in there. We got to get Huggy Bear in there.
Oh, Huggy Bear is well on his way for sure. Yeah. That fun's all gone. Now the good fighters beat him in depressing ways. The bad fighters lose to him in depressing ways. Like, and his fights are just, they're a slog now. They're just no fun. It's really after the John Jones fight. He made it to an interim title shot, got his arm broken by John Jones, but he can always say he fought for a UFC belt. But since then, the highlights have been few and far between. Like, both of his heavyweight fights where he was like, I just can't do this anymore. I'm 37 and I'm huge. Like, the Ben Rothwell fight was depressing. The Tanner Boser fight was depressing. And the better light heavyweights are just pasting him now. Like, Jamal Hill thrashed him. He
almost lost to Shogun.
He almost lost to Shogun, and Shogun is possibly the most shot fighter in the UFC, which is saying a lot, because there's some shot fighters in the UFC.
You want a split decision against 2022 Mercy of Shogun Hoa.
Like, all the stuff that made him fun is kind of gone, because at his best, he had this really disjointed set of skills that they never coalesced into a fully functional game, but they were dangerous enough individually that they worked. Like, he throws head kicks, or at his best, he threw head kicks like most fighters throw a jab. You're establishing the rhythm. It's your range finder. You're telling your opponent, I'm dangerous out to here. You're setting up your other offense. That's what their jab is for. He walks out and he throws head kicks. And at his best, those head kicks were fast and they were super heavy. Obviously, he now has a choke, ironically named after him. But there's a reason that, he has like 4 shoulder chokes in the UFC. One, early on, people would hold on to headlock, to guillotines too long because they were terrified of him landing on top of them and starting to ground and pound. His ground and pound was ferocious. And at least his first 2 were just a guy who did not want to let go of that guillotine, because he did not want the elbows and punches to start raining down. And before they knew it, they were, waking up and staring at the lights. Later on, he actually developed setups for that. Like, he put it on Michal Oleksiejczuk, and Oleksiejczuk didn't do anything wrong. Like, OSP has figured out a way to trap that arm and make you guillotine him when you don't want to. Like, Oleksiejczuk was like, I don't want to do this. I know what's going to happen. I'm going to pass out. And he couldn't stop it. All that's gone. Now, he's become, he used to be low output. Now he's become almost no output. He used to have the worst gas tank outside of heavyweights of any top 15 fighter in the UFC. Now he might have the worst gas tank in the UFC period, including the heavyweights. Like, I don't understand how it's possible for him to throw that little volume and get tired that quickly. Like, why doesn't he gas on his walkout?
Shout out to Gilbert Burns' brother saying, hey, Ben, that's my title.
I mean, this is the worst fight on the card, even though it might end in something really entertaining. I'm going with OSP here, and I'm not going with him to get an incredible, his 5th Von Preux choke. I'm not going with him to be 6'5". I don't care. I'm going to head kick you anyway. None of that is going to happen. This is going to be a clinch fest. Both guys are going to be exhausted by the middle of the second round, and give me OSP. I never pick a split decision, but give me OSP by split decision, because some of these rounds will be so draggy and so little will happen that it's just going to be hard for the judges to score them, and it's going to come down to nuance. And yeah, give me OSP 29, 28, 28, 29, and 30, 27, because there'll be like one weird judge that like it's like OSP is killing it.
He foot stomped him.
Yeah.
Can I just like pick a draw? Just move on.
Dude, if you want to pick a draw because you think there's going to be like 3 nut fouls and finally a point's going to get taken and it's good, I'm with you. Or we'll get like a weird 10-8 round. Like I
just pick a no contest. Because so we can break it down again 3 months from now. OSP, he's a definition of like a weathered veteran. I mean, his athleticism has faded over the years. He's a counter striker that he loves his like fade back left hand. He has a kicking arsenal. He has power, but going back down to 205, I think his power was overrated in his heyday. Never mind now. Going back down to 205, I wonder, how much is still there. He's taken an ungodly amount of damage. I mean, he got knocked out by Jamal Hill and Tanner Boser. You mentioned the output. The output is all but gone. He has a ground game. I really think his ground game is underrated, especially. Well, I shouldn't say underrated because, he's got, like you mentioned, he has a nickname and he has a submission named after him. Though I'll continue to call it the Von Flue choke because poor Jason Von Flue, that's all he has. I don't want to take OSP. And then I look at Antonio Trocoli. I watched his last fight. It looked like it was done in a garage.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the cage, it was so small. The cage was so small. It reminded me of when I used to drop off my kids when they were really young to like a daycare. And like the little like snap together like gates they would have. Like that's what it looked like. There was like, and he was like the 2-year-old toddler who's like taller than like the 9-month-old toddler, and his like opponent was like fat and still had like baby fat on him. So it was like the 2-year-old beating up the 9-month-old baby fat kid. So he's 6'5". You mentioned like how he used to fight at welterweight. I don't know, 6'5", but he switches stances a lot. He makes defensive mistakes, but he backs straight up. He will look to wrestle a little bit. His setups are ugly. He's got some like he'll just dart right in. He did hit a really good throw on the Contender Series, so like that might be his best way to get inside, do some judo work. He's got some good back takes. He's got 5 submission wins. OSP is absolutely done being an upper level guy. I mean, he's looked so bad. He looks completely shot. But even that said, this is still a step up for Trocoli. Trocoli's going to want to wrestle, and I feel like that's the only thing that OSP can still do is wrestle. He can still, like you said, he can still grind. He's still a good grappler. If you go for something and OSP's on top of you, like, if he goes for a throw or something and OSP ends up on top, OSP can do things from there. So he can land some ground and pound, more just hold you down, weigh on you. Fuck it. You know what? Let's make it. I'm so bored with this pick. Let's make it exciting. I say he hits another Von Flue choke. Give me OSP by second round submission.
There you go. 2 picks for St. Preux to revisit the glory to some extent or another. Next up is a middleweight contest between 2 gentlemen who definitely need a win here. If there were ever a pink slip derby in today's UFC, it is this one. It is Edmen Shahbazyan versus Dalcha Lungiambula. Shahbazyan, the 25-year-old Californian, is 11-3 overall. He is 4-3 since joining the UFC out of the 2nd season of Dana White's Contender Series. That's the good news. The bad news is that the 3 in his record is his last 3 fights. He was the Golden Boy. He was one of the most hyped at least, prospects in the UFC 3 years ago, after, winning his first 4 fights in the UFC, after obviously the association with Ronda Rousey. Since then, he has run into trouble. The next level of UFC middleweight, Derek Brunson, Jack Hermansson, Nasruddin Imavov. That's 3 straight losses for him. The most recent of those, the Imavov fight, was a second round TKO stoppage via ground and pound a little over a year ago, actually, at UFC 268. So Shahbazyan returning for the first time in 13 months, and he will look to get back to winning ways against Lungiambula. The 35-year-old Congolese fighter by way of South Africa is 11-5 overall. He is 2-4 since joining the UFC as a former 2-division champ in EFC, former heavyweight and lightweight champ there. However, the bulk of his UFC work has taken place actually at middleweight. He's 2-4 in the UFC. He's 1-3 at middleweight. He is also on a 3-fight losing streak. Those being a unanimous decision loss to Marc-Andre Barriault last September, a first-round submission loss to Cody Brundage this March, and a second-round KO at the hands of Puna Soriano at UFC on ABC, Ortega versus Rodriguez in July. So Lungiambula will be looking to get things turned around as well here. He is not at all favored to do so. Shahbazyan, despite the losing streak, despite the layoff, minus 295. Lungiambula plus 245. I mean, I'm not gonna steal your catchphrase anymore, but I will say I'm stunned at these odds. Edmen Shahbazyan, in hindsight, when you look at his UFC run, the things he's good at have stayed the same, and the things that he's not good at have not especially, like, they were never fixed. So unless he has spent the last 13 months fixing those problems, he has one way to beat Dalcha Lungiambula, and he's got a short window of time to do it. I mean, Edmen Shahbazyan, you've got the Armenian last name, you've got the Glendale Fight Club affiliation, you've got, like, Ronda Rousey not just showing up in the front row and, like, doing a little wave, in his early UFC fights, but doing actual, like, kind of embedded segments that you normally only get for, like, pay-per-view main card fighters. You're getting this for, like, a 21-year-old kid. But despite all of those things, he's not really a judo fighter. He is a long, rangy, surprisingly fast kickboxer who comes out like a house on fire and gasses out super fast. Like, that's what he's got. And Derek Brunson figured it out and showed the way. Derek Brunson was like, if you can last the first round against Shahbazyan, he's going to get tired. And if you're a real big-bodied 185er, you can start to bully him. Brunson absolutely did that. I mean, Shahbazyan beat Brunson in the first round. That's not bad. You beat a top, I mean, he was definitely top 10 guy there, might have been top 7 or 8, and Shahbazyan, like, beat him convincingly in the first round, but Shahbazyan was already sucking wind at the end of that round. Like, Brunson was already starting to turn the tide. The second round was a mauling. The third round, I mean, I shouldn't say surprised, he shouldn't have come out for the third round, but I'm not surprised that he did, and Brunson squashed him. Hermansson, same story. Only difference is Hermansson isn't quite as heavy or mean as Brunson, so he just ended up losing a one-way decision. Imavov, it's back to, like, a big, mean dude, and he got finished in the second round. Again, just fast start, then Imavov turned it around on him. Lungiambula is definitely a step down from those 3 guys. I mean, Lungiambula is on his own 3-fight losing streak, and it's against non-top 10 guys, but I don't see what Shahbazyan has here other than I can knock him out in the first 4 minutes or I lose this fight. And that's a tough thing to say when he's taking on somebody in Lungiambula whose UFC wins are against Dequan Townsend and Marcus Perez. I don't think either of those guys is still in the UFC anymore. Like, so Lungiambula, another one of those guys that doesn't have a single win over a fighter still in the UFC. But Yeah, I mean, it's a huge line here. It's a big upset, but I feel like this fight should be a pick'em. So if you tell me that one guy is a massive underdog, I'll lean that way. Shahbazyan, again, he was 20. I think he might have only been 20 or 21 when he debuted in the UFC. And despite the fact that he's got good power in his strikes, like, he looks skinny and undermuscled compared to, well, like when he's standing across from like Derek Brunson and Nasruddin Imavov, you know, even Brad Tavares, whom he beat, like he looked undersized. He might have, I mean, he's probably gained some weight and gained some more power in the 13 months he's been off, but that's not going to help his gas tank either. That's going to have the opposite effect. So he's still got about 5 minutes to finish Lungiambula. And while that's happened to Lungiambula, it hasn't happened by strikes. Like Cody Brundage, like, grabbed his neck in a scramble. Give me Lungiambula to win this by third round TKO. Shahbazyan has a good first round. Maybe he wins the first round. And then we all know the story from there. Lungiambula, despite being built like a fucking statue of a Greek god, has decent functional cardio late into fights. Like, he's lost decisions and he's lost via late finish, but it's not because he was more tired. It's because the other fighter was better. I don't think Shahbazyan is. Give me Lungiambula in the huge upset.
Yeah. So, yeah, this fight's interesting. I'm not giving up on Shahbazyan. I mean, he's only 25 years old. So, I mean, he's really at the age that guys start coming into the UFC to begin with. And his losses, as you mentioned, I mean, his losses are Derek Brunson, Jack Hermanson, and Nasruddin Imavov. Like, those three.
Top 10 fighters.
Yeah, like, they're three studs. You know, if Edmen Shahbazyan was making his debut right now in the UFC and he had those three losses, we'd all give him a pass. If those losses were on the regional scene, we'd go, oh, yeah. I mean, this guy's got some good wins. He beat Brad Tavares on the regional scene. Oh, he lost to these three guys. Yeah, look at those three guys. And he's only 25. I think we'd be going crazy about him. He's long and lengthy. I think he's technically sound. He's got a good jab. He's very accurate. He's good at wrapping in punches around his opponent's high guard. His check left hook is definitely his best punch. You mentioned that he's got good power. I mean, really underrated. And he was knocking guys out. Knocked out Brad Tavares. I mean, Brad Tavares was a high kick, but, you know, knocking guys out. And that was before he was even really in his power years. He's still not in his power years at 25. I like that he goes to the body, but he doesn't check leg kicks. He's a weak defensive wrestler. I mean, he struggled on the bottom with Derek Brunson, with Jack Hermanson. And you mentioned the biggest issue with Shahbazyan is his gas tank. He gassed out bad. Even the win against Darren Stewart, he gassed out bad, and he got really ugly in a fight that he was ahead. But I feel like we've seen guys, not many, but we've seen guys make small adjustments and be able to fix that. I feel like at his age, you know, hold back some cardio, hold back some of your strikes.
I would feel better about his chances in this fight if I knew that he had left Glendale.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if he went over to like Fitness and Glory MMA, like, I feel great about him right now.
Fitness and Glory. Now, okay, having said that, he has spent some time in Vegas over the last year. I mean, he's been training with people like Dewey Cooper, so he's at least splitting time.
Yeah, if he was at so that's at the PI. Yeah, I think that's at the PI.
I'm trying to remember whether I see Cooper coming out with Syndicate or Extreme Couture guys. It's not Extreme Couture.
Oh,
like, I mean, he has his own practice. Like, it's like Black Cobra MMA or whatever, but he's an add-on coach.
Okay, yeah. If he went to a place where they, just work on his cardio, obviously get the footwork in, get the road work in, and just conserve your energy a little bit, I'd feel much better. He's only 25. That's the thing about him. He's still really, really young. And Lungiambula is old. And now he's a humongous guy. He's pretty athletic. He throws everything with power. He's explosive. He hits extremely hard. Because of his style, he has to conserve his own energy, and he kind of does it by not throwing. He'll just take big portions of moments off. But he also makes a mistake of looking for the perfect blow, trying to land that one big shot to end the fight. He loads up a lot. He has tired out in the past. He gassed out against Ankalaev. He backs straight up, and he parries punches well. So he has some good – well, he backs up with the issue, but he parries punches well, which I like. He has a judo black belt. He's got some trips and throws. But if taking down himself, he really struggles to get back up. I've also seen him crumble at times when times get covered. Like I said this in the past, like I question his heart. He seems like a front runner who checks out when he gets challenged. He's looked really terrible lately. Quickly subbed by Cody Brunage. He was knocked out. In his last fight against Puna Soriano, so you got to worry about his chin. Lungiambula has the physical too. He's gonna be so big. You mentioned it's not many guys he's got to have a cardio advantage against, other than Edmen Shahbazyan. I like your pick of like surviving a storm and coming on late and winning. I like it for somebody else. I don't know if Lungiambula can survive a storm. I don't think he's mentally strong enough. So I say Shahbazyan piece him from distance. You say Shahbazyan needs to finish this fight in the first round. I think he does. I think Shahbazyan catches him. I think Shahbazyan knocks him out. Give me Shahbazyan my first round knockout.
There you go. Two differing picks on this one. And Sherdog, play-by-play man, Jay Petrie, will certainly be pulling for Keith to be right so that he has to spend as little time as possible typing these two names.
I hope he has those like copy and paste on the side or something.
Well, no, he always picks the harder name and copies it so that he types one and then, pastes the other.
Good luck figuring out which ones.
Exactly. Yeah. We head now to the bantamweight division for a matchup between Raul Rosas Jr. and Jay Perrin. Rosas, the 18-year-old Mexican by way of California. Yes, you probably remember him being signed as a 17-year-old on the Contender Series back in September. Youngest signee in UFC history. They did wait until after his 18th birthday to actually get him into the cage. But here he is. He is a perfect 6-0. He turned 18 in October and will look to celebrate a belated birthday with his first UFC win. Across the cage from him will be Jay Perrin, the 29-year-old New Hampshire native by way of Las Vegas, is 10-6 overall. He is 0-2 since joining the UFC out of a variety of New England promotions. He debuted in February, dropped a unanimous decision to Mario Bautista, came back at UFC 278 in August and dropped another unanimous decision, this time to Auri Chileng. So he will be hoping third time is the charm. He will be hoping to derail the hype train, spoil the story, insert cliche here at the expense of Rosas. He is not favored to do so. Raul Rosas Jr. minus 230 right now. Perrin plus 195 on the comeback. Keith, Raul Rosas Jr. We just had Francis Marshall fight at UFC Orlando last weekend. Obviously, there's a whole kind of difference. Marshall's 22 or 23. Rosas just barely turned 18. But something I said in the preview for that one is that Marshall, like his skill set, he just looks more ready for prime time than some of the extravagantly young picks that come to the UFC. I want your pick on this fight, but I think we were both watching the Contender Series live that night and probably talking in the Sherdog Slack. Win, lose, wash out, and come back 5 years later. Like Rosas has got all the time in the world, but right now, does your gut say that like he has the skill set to stick around?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So I had a moral issue with him fighting on the Contender Series 17. Now, obviously, he was really good. It wasn't the talent sense. He's extremely talented. He was solo stretched his opponent, in his contender series matchup. It was more just, I don't think 17-year-olds should be fighting in the UFC. Now, I get it, dude. I joined the Army when I was 17, so like, I get it. So don't come at me, oh, this guy's who's, in the military. You're like, okay, fine. Yes, but there was guys in the military at 12 years old and the Revolutionary War should be allowed that to happen. Like, you can always find exceptions. It was just one of these things. Like, I don't know why he was turning 18. Like, what was it? Like it was a couple months later. Like, put him in at the end of the season or put him on next season when he was 18.
Or just pull him straight to the UFC.
Or put him right after that. Yeah. It's how I felt with
Victoria Lee has entered the chat.
Yeah, that's that. And I interviewed Victoria. You can find it. I did an interview with Victoria. I asked her about that. I told her that, I'm like, how I don't really feel comfortable watching it at that time. I think she was like 15 or 16, seeing a 16-year-old get punched. Like, no.
Like fighting like 30-year-old too.
Yeah. My oldest daughter turns 13 this week. I couldn't imagine her 3 years from now fighting in one championship getting punched in the face. One, because she can't fight. But as far as skills, the kid's good, like really good. Here's another thing. They were talking about him like starting training at like 4 years old. He was fighting like kids MMA fights at 9 years. Like, kids shouldn't be fighting MMA at 9 years old. I'm sorry. Anyways, I'll get off my soapbox, but and I did. Like, who loves MMA more than I do? Like, I do a freaking preview show that's like 3 hours long. I mean, give me a break. But the kid's good. He's very athletic. He can fight out of both stances. He's very aggressive on the feet, fast strikes, throws a lot of kicks. He likes a lot of flying stuff. He'll throw like a Superman punch or a flying knee, or he can be wild, which leaves openings both to get hit and get taken down. He stands up too tall, but he was eating punches well. Like, what I've seen the times he's been hit, he eats punches well. Doesn't really seem phased. Good entries. Not a powerful wrestler, but he's so athletic that he gets in there quick. Like, he's not a technical wrestler, I should say. On top, smother and top control. Advances really well on the ground. Some slick back takes, good back takes, mean ground and pound. He definitely has a submission stretch. We talked about almost having a solo stretch, which would have been insane on the contender series. He does chase submissions that aren't there in a loose position. Actually happened to him on the contender series, and he got taken down late in the fight. So, question his defensive wrestling. Jay Perrin's a guy I'm very familiar with. He's, you mentioned coming up from New England, seen him fighting in like Cage Titans and stuff.
I was gonna say he's fought in like the second tier, like Cage Titans and NEF, like fighting in the Chinese restaurant, hockey rink or whatever. Yeah,
he might have fought in reality fighting, maybe. He's a compact boxer. He's got good volume. He marches down his foes. A bit of a little rock'em sock'em on the feet, where he trusts his chin a little bit to kind of eat a shot to land some of his own, and he has surprising power. I wouldn't say I see a stinging power. He's not like a fight ending, land one punch, knock you out guy. That's not him. He's got a really good left hook. He has such a very heavy boxing style that it leaves his legs to be open to get kicked. But he's well-rounded. He will look to wrestle. He gets in the clinch. He likes the dirty box. He likes the knee, likes the elbow, likes to grind in there. He'll drop down on a takedown from inside. Despite trying to wrestle a lot, he isn't a strong takedown artist. He's more of a just kind of surprised you get the fight to the ground. But when he gets it to the ground, again, he's not a strong grappler. Like, he gets it to win rounds, but he needs to improve his control. He does do well in a scramble to try to advance position, try to get it back. But the best part of his game, he has good cardio. He's not going to slow down. He'll go hard for 15 minutes. This is a step up. This is not. This is the right test for an 18. Well, not. It's the right test for a highly touted prospect coming into the UFC. I don't think it's the right test for an 18-year-old. That said, Rojas obviously is the exception to the rule. Perrin could win this match, especially if he gets his takedowns. He works the top. He uses that like extremely aggressive, wild style of of Rojas against him. And don't be surprised if that happens. However, Rojas is 18. And at that age, you make huge jumps of improvement from each fight. Like, we could see a completely different fighter than we saw just this summer. He has a reach advantage. He's more likely the submission threat. If the fight ends in a submission, it's Rojas. If one guy steamrolls the other one, it's Rojas.
Yeah.
Perrin's not going to steamroll. Perrin grinds away a decision or something like that. I think this fight might look like the Contender Series fight. I think he dominates the position. I think he's just a better athlete. I think he might get a couple of near submissions. Perrin's really tough. He's not a high level UFC fighter. Obviously, he's 0-2. He's more of a lower level UFC talent. But I do think he's a UFC talent. When I seen him in the region, I thought he was not a special fighter, but he had some talent there. Kind of had a raw deal so far in the UFC. He's fought two really good guys, and now he's, getting Rojas in this fight. But I think Rojas dominates. I think he gets a dominant decision win.
Yeah, I see this mostly the same way you do. I think a lot of Raul Rosas' the wildness of his approach, his tendency to go in too hard for submissions that may not be there, they're at least in part a result of the quality of competition he's faced on the way up and just of his own success. He fights like a guy that has been able to impose his will on all of his opponents so far. His appearance on the Contender Series was the first time he'd even been to the third round, let alone to a decision. At some point he's going to lose his first fight. I mean, I don't know what his ceiling is, but he ain't Khabib Nurmagomedov. He's going to lose a fight at some point here. And it'll be interesting to see how his approach changes at that point. What's it going to look like the first time he's losing grappling exchanges on the ground? What's it going to look like the first time he really gets hurt by a strike? The first time he can't get a takedown? I think his approach might change. Here, you're right. If somebody steamrolls the other, if there's a first round finish, it's Raul Rosas doing something nasty to Jay Perrin. But yeah, Perrin's chances get better as this fight goes along. We know now that Rosas has enough cardio to function for 15 minutes against a low-level opponent where he is in charge the whole time and dictating the pace. But cardio when you're dictating the pace and cardio when the pace is being dictated on you are two very different things. And Perrin's had rough matchups so far, but in both of those fights, the third round has been the best round for him. He actually won the third round against Alrichi Lang, and it was just because he was the fresher guy and he has kind of that grindy dog mentality to him. So if this thing gets out of the first round and it wasn't a 10-8 round, things get more interesting all of a sudden, and it becomes even more of an appropriate test for Rosas. But I don't know how dominant it will be, but I think even if Perrin is the fresher guy in the third round, I think he'll probably be behind 2 rounds by then, and it becomes more of a gut check, and let's see how this young kid responds to kind of having put on him for 5 minutes. Does he survive? Does he wilt? Do we get just a straightforward 29-28 decision? That's kind of what I'm looking at here. Give me Rosas by clear decision, but where we at least do learn a few more things about him. We head now to the heavyweight division, and if there's gotta be an unranked heavyweight fight on your card, this is about as good as it gets. If you are a regular watcher of our show, you know that I will sometimes refer to the obligatory unranked heavyweight slobber knocker, and I'm talking about something like, Parker Porter versus Jared Vanderaa. This ain't that. This is 2 former top 10 heavyweights, and the winner will kind of stay in that orbit. The loser takes even another step back, but should be a banger either way.
I think both of their last fights were main events.
I believe you're right. Yeah. I mean, we're going to get to that in a minute, but you're absolutely correct. It is Jairzinho Rozenstruik versus Chris Daukaus. Rozenstruik, the 34-year-old Surinamese who goes by Biggie Boy, is 12-4 overall. He is 6-4 since joining the UFC about 3 years ago as an undefeated mixed martial arts prospect and former kickboxer. He has lost his last 2 fights. got knocked out by Alexander Volkov in the first round in the headliner of UFC Fight Night 207 back in June. Prior to that, he dropped a unanimous decision to Curtis Blades last September at UFC 266. Rozenstruik, of course, very notable because he debuted in the UFC and blew through his first 4 opponents, 2 under 30-second knockouts, and then an all-timer of a comeback against Alistair Overeem. That got him all the way to Francis Ngannou. That did not go well for him. Since then, he's sort of been bouncing back and forth, but kind of hanging around the edges of the top 10. He's going to look to get back on track against Daukaus. The 33-year-old former cop from Philadelphia is 12-5 overall. He's 4-2 in the UFC. That's the good news. The bad news is that it is 4 and then 2. He won his first 4 fights in the UFC as well, blew through all 4 men in 6.5 minutes or less, getting him all the way to a UFC main event and possible title eliminator against Derek Lewis. That was last December. It did not go well for him. He got plunked in the first round. He came back in March in the headliner of UFC on ESPN 33 and was knocked out again, this time by Curtis Blades early in the second round. So 2 gentlemen on 2-fight losing streaks. Having said that, there's not the feeling of desperation about this fight to me that there is about, like, say, Shahbazyan versus Lungiambula that we just talked about a few minutes ago. Let me get the odds out there. Rozenstruik -165, Daukaus +140. So close but moderate favorite is Biggie Boy. Yeah, this doesn't have the same feeling of desperation. One, because it's heavyweight. I mean, heavyweight right now is as healthy as it's been in the UFC literally ever. Like, this is as good as the UFC heavyweight division has ever been. I don't care what area you're thinking about right now. You're thinking about, oh, well, what about when they had Josh Barnett and Randy Couture and Rico Rodriguez? Okay, name the next guy down the ladder.
Really young Andre Arlovski, like really Ian Freeman.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Freeman, yeah. The UFC heavyweight division is as healthy as it's ever been because 2 fighters this good are kind of hanging around that 10 to 15 spot. That's not a bad place to be. And neither of these guys is losing his job if he loses. The UFC's only got 20 heavyweights, and 10 of them are terrible. They're not going anywhere. But if they want to stay in the title picture or make their way back or make a case for, fighting for a title a year or 18 months from now, they got to win this fight. This is a crossroads for these 2 guys for sure. Rozenstruik, I was never quite as high on him as some other people seem to be. I ended up watching a good amount of his kickboxing ahead of his UFC debut. Just his management reached out to Sherdog, said, hey, he's debuting in the UFC in a couple weeks. Can you update these things and that? So I kind of went back and watched some tape on him, MMA as well as kickboxing. And I was like, this guy for being, he's not Dutch, but he's, Surinamese, the same place a lot of Dutch kickboxers have come from, and kind of having Biggie Boy, which is about as Dutch kickboxery a nickname as you can think of. Like, no, this is mostly a huge dude who hits crushingly hard, but is more or less kind of a brawler. Like, he's a slightly classy brawler. Like, he's not, this is not Remy Banyaski or like Peter Arts or something. Like, this dude's just a big mauler. And once he ran into bigger maulers like Francis Ngannou or just actual classy kickboxers like Cyril Gane, he just didn't have a whole lot for him. And I figured he'd kind of settle into what he is now. The thing that concerns me about him is the Volkov fight, because losing to Alexander Volkov is not anything to be ashamed of. Volkov is one of the most, I think he's going to end up being one of the most underrated heavyweights in MMA history, just in terms of what he's done. But getting knocked out in the first round by Alexander Volkov is a concern. And everything that Volkov put on Rozenstruik seemed to hurt him. Like, even before the actual knockout, just like the jabs and the right cross, like everything he hit Rozenstruik with kind of made his eyes go googly and made him like reset. I can't remember whether I picked Volkov. I think I picked Volkov to win that fight, but I'm sure I picked him either by late knockout or by decision. So I called that fight wrong because if one guy was going to knock the other out in the first round, I figured it would be Rozenstruik. But it gives me concerns for his chin going forward because, dude, Volkov is not a high power striker by UFC heavyweight standards, especially not with his fists. You know, like his knees are pretty brutal. But if you're as aggressive as Rozenstruik is and have the kind of defensive lapses he does, if your chin is gone, you're gone. Daukaus is a good test for that. Daukaus doesn't have quite the same diversity of strikes as Rozenstruik, but I think he's a better straight boxer. I think he's definitely more defensively sound as a boxer. And he has deceptively good power. Like he came to the UFC looking like the bad stereotype of a cop. Like he looked like the like, oh, you know, the cops, they just eat donuts.
Ben, there's stereotypes of cops and they're bad. What?
You know, there are a few, and of the bad stereotypes of cops, like honestly, they eat too much donuts is on the kinder side of them. But but despite just, hey, being kind of a flabby guy, you know, he was always deceptively nimble, quick on his feet. Gas tank, never a problem. I mean, it's not a problem when you finish your first 3 UFC opponents in the first round, but you know, he's undergone a body transformation, especially once he moved to fighting full time, just kind of like, you know, said, I'm going to step away from the force for at least a few years and see how far I can take this fighting thing. He's looked physically different. He's gotten leaner. He's gotten more muscular. And he doesn't stand out as somebody with crushing one-shot power, but he at least has as many rolls and nickels in his gloves as Alexander Volkov does. I think there's like a sneaky good upset potential here. Just Rozenstruik is hittable. He doesn't seem to know any direction but forward and any gear other than fifth. It's what made him so terrifying and so exciting in his first few fights. But once he hit a higher level of opponent and there was just more tape on him and people kind of figured him out, it seems to have hit its ceiling. I don't think Rozenstruik is going to be able to blitz Daukaus. Like if Rozenstruik beats Daukaus, I'm betting it's because they both survive whatever early crazy collisions there are, and Rozenstruik starts leaning on the leg kicks that Daukaus doesn't always deal well with, and kind of starts, you know, doing damage, slowing Daukaus's movement, and racking up points, you know, maybe even winning rounds with him, and just wins a medium-paced kickboxing match for the 2.5 rounds after the 2 minutes of madness. But I actually think that's the outside chance. I think Chris Daukaus is probably going to be able to avoid most of like Rozenstruik's like haymakers on the feet, and while standing in the pocket with Derek Lewis didn't serve him well, you know, Derek Lewis is still an incredibly dangerous like fighter to stand in the pocket with, and that's not Rozenstruik's like best distance. I think Daukaus gets it done here. Give me Chris Daukaus, and give me Daukaus by first round TKO. And it's not because I think Daukaus is like 10 times better than Rozenstruik. I think it's just because that's the round where Rozenstruik's going to put himself in the most danger, is going to kind of put his own face like on the gunnery range for the longest. My second most likely outcome will be Rozenstruik by first round knockout. So it sounds like the thing I'm most sure of is that like judge is not needed. But yeah. Give me Daukaus by first round knockout in the slight upset here.
Yeah, Rozenstruik, he's tough to get your head around, this guy. Some of it has to do with coming to MMA a lot later than he should have. He's very loose and relaxed kickboxer, but almost to a fault, because he can be very gun shy for a guy who's decorated power puncher that he is. I mean, we've seen it in multiple fights now. He was refusing to throw punches against Sorogan, even though he knocked out Junior Dos Santos in their fight. It was kind of like lulled him to sleep before he landed him. And even like Alex Orban, he really wouldn't need a come from behind victory against Alex Orban if he just let his hands go. He is a counter striker. He's got quick hands. You talk about him being a brawler, and I can see that. I understand what you're saying, but he can box when he tries. And the big thing about it is he has no tells. He doesn't really wind up. It's short shots, and that's where the best power comes from. He's got a crisp jab. The jab kind of hurts. Like that's his power, like a punch. He's got earth-shattering power when he lets his hands go. I mean, we saw what he did to Lacerda over in. He landed that deadly, he just walked Augusto Sakai right into that deadly hook. But he's got the negatives of a kickboxer. He stands directly in front of his opponent, make himself a stationary target. He really struggles with guys who move, like Ciryl Gane, who was able to just use their speed to land, hit two, three good shots, get out of the way. He struggled with Volkov because of that size and length, kicks and stuff, and I'm worried about the damage he took from Volkov too. That's something that we both saw because Volkov was teeing off on him and really having his way before he put him out. And then the ground game. There's no ground games. Rozenstruik, there's no offensive wrestling. His defensive wrestling's really bad. He gets taken down really easily. In fairness, like the guys who've taken him down, like Curtis Blades. Okay, Curtis Blades does that to people. Now, Daukaus, I'm glad you talked about he's a much better athlete than he looks like he is. He moves pretty well. He's pretty technically sound. Quick hands, pretty accurate. He can crack. I mean, he has 4 knockouts already in the UFC. So he's been starting to add some kicks to his game. Throws a pretty fast high kick, but he has some defensive holes. He backs straight up. Derek Lewis made him pay for that. Parker Porter and Shamil Abdurakhimov, who he, beat both those guys, but they backed him up with just like power, backing him with some power shots. But one thing that I think this is the best avenue for victory for Daukaus, which again, I can see him piecing up Rozenstruik with his hands. Absolutely. But we've seen him grind in the past. He can get in the clinch. He can grind. He can dirty box. He can occasionally take the fight to the ground. He's a decent grappler. He was a BJJ black belt. And then I'm worried about his chin too. I mean, he's been cracked by Derek Lewis and Curtis Blades, and I've said for a while Curtis Blades' power is extremely underrated. Like he's starting to starch people, but obviously Derek Lewis is. We know what it is with Derek Lewis. He's the best knockout artist in the history of the UFC, statistically wise. I agree that it's not a desperation fight where the loser is getting cut. That's not going to happen. I mean, heavyweights have the longest leash of anybody.
Chase Sherman.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it's desperation if they want to be an upper echelon guy. If you want to be someone that could contend for a title, and I think that might already be off with these guys. But if there is anything, if one of these guys gets a beautiful knockout, that kind of puts him back in the mix. I can see the next fight.
The loser of this is no longer a guy that can even headline fight nights. That's
my point. Yeah. The winner of this could be thrown right back in there. On the feet, I really do think it could go either way. I think Rozenstruik could plunk him. I think Daukaus could plunk him. If I had to pick who's more likely to plunk the other guy, I would go with Rozenstruik based on even though I do agree with you that Daukaus' power is underrated, I would still have to give the power advantage to Rozenstruik. I'd give this the speed. But I really think that if Daukaus is smart, he'll just close the distance. He'll get in the clinch. He'll grind. He'll throw in some takedowns. He'll make this not make this a kickboxer, make this an MMA fight. Maybe go get some takedowns, spend some time on top. And I actually think that's what's going to have. So I'm going the opposite. You're going
I'm going fireworks. You're going slow.
I'm thinking smarter than it's not going to be exciting, but get yourself in the win column. I actually bet the over. I don't know what the under. I don't know what the over under is, but I'm assuming it's like half a round, round and a half. Probably. I'd sprinkle. I'd sprinkle a little on the over. Just throw a little sprinkle out there. A
little sprinkle. I'm looking right now actually because I'm curious.
And then no matter you go the under, I go the over. No matter what, when it hits, we'll say, yeah. See, you always gotta bet whatever we say.
Well, I'll say this: like I don't have a specific under, but fight goes the distance is plus 280. Fight ends inside the distance is minus 400.
Ooh.
That's
Yeah,
like
go with
some.
the plus 280. Go with the distance. I think I'm surprised. I thought it'd be higher than that. I actually thought it'd be like plus 350 or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say Daukaus wins a like a ho hum decision.
I like this.
All right, good.
I mean, you and I, we typically disagree on 2 or 3 fights per
Yeah,
card,
sure.
which is natural. I mean,
Yeah.
but it's more rare that we have something like this, because usually you and I see the dynamic of the fight the same way,
Yeah.
and just we might differ on which of the likely outcomes is the one that actually happens. But here, I think we picture the fight working out 2 different ways, so that makes me extra excited to watch this one.
Well, I'll say this: it's not that I like if one of them wins really quick knockout. We have just big, huge, like you mentioned, collisions. Like that's not surprising. Like I really think there's so many possibilities. Other than that, the one thing that would surprise me would be like a Rozenstruik submission. you know. Other than that,
Rozenstruik just gets the gator roll and like
yeah,
does-
or he's getting takedowns and driving through. I want to throw a shout out as we were talking about betting. I wanted to make sure I get his name right, and of course he has the hardest name in history. But on Twitter, his name is Psycho Keenestor, or fuck it, I'm Keen Storm Chaser.
Cytokine Storm Chaser.
I don't know. Is that? Am I supposed to know what cytokine is?
Cytokine Storm is what kills you if you die from COVID.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Damn, you are so much smarter than me. It's not even close. Shout out to that guy. He gave us love on Twitter, saying that if we both take an underdog, he likes to bet that. So I guess he's been winning with that, so which is good. I don't know if that's a formula for victory. Like he might pay for that in the near future. But I just want to shout out that guy. So he seems like a good dude.
All right. Well, I hope he just understands that. Don't follow that if the fighter we're picking is from Texas and or a cop.
Yeah,
it might not.
Yeah, Trevor Giles.
Exclude The pay-per-view main card of UFC 282 begins with a featherweight matchup between Bryce Mitchell and Ilia Topuria. Mitchell, the 28-year-old from Arkansas, is a perfect 15-0 as a professional mixed martial artist. He is a perfect 6-0 in the UFC since joining, a little over 3.5 years ago. A very logical progression of opposition. He started off against fairly low-level foes, gradually working his way up to solid mid-roster fighter Andre Fili on Halloween of 2020. Had a whole year plus off, came back this March at UFC 272 and showed that he had not lost a step, didn't miss a beat in taking a pretty one-sided decision over Edson Barboza. He will look to make it 7 in a row in the UFC at the expense of another undefeated gentleman. Topuria, the 25-year-old Georgian, born in Germany, living in Spain, is 12-0 as a professional mixed martial artist. He is 4-0 in the UFC. He is 3-0 at featherweight. He did have a one-off fight at lightweight against Jai Herbert in his most recent outing. That was at UFC London back in March. No difference it made. He got a second-round TKO. The last 3 of his wins in the UFC have all been knockouts. He will look to make it 5-0 in the UFC. He'll look to reestablish himself as one of the preeminent prospects / contenders at featherweight here in the main card opener. He is the slightest of favorites to do so. He's minus 140 or so. Mitchell around plus 120. Keith, we do matchmaking on our recap shows. Always matchmake both sides of the main event, usually both sides of the co-main, and then at least the winners of any other like high level or prominent fights that took place. And when the fighter in question is one of these guys, Bryce Mitchell, Ilia Topuria, Arnold Allen, you go to another division. If it's Shavkat Rakhmonov, Sean Brady up until a few months ago, the thing I'm always for is, keep these undefeated guys away from each other until you absolutely have no other option. Like, don't like smash your Hot Wheels cars together before you have to. Like, having too many title contenders on huge winning streaks is a good problem to have. Too many of the UFC's divisions have the opposite problem, where nobody can seem to string together 3 wins in a row. The champ has already beaten all the top contenders, and they keep beating all the next level. I think this is pretty good timing. Like, if you were going to bring Mitchell and Topuria together, I think now is a great time. One, because they're both young enough that it's not a death knell for one of these guys if they lose. They're 25 and 20. They're like 24 and 25, not 34 and 35. The winner of this fight isn't in a title fight in his next fight, might not even be in a title eliminator in his next fight, but he's close enough that this can function as kind of a signature win for the guy. It's almost the next thing you would need to do with Mitchell, where he went from, Charles Rosa to Andre Fili to Edson Barboza. So, you go from kind of low-level roster guy, mid-level roster guy, top 15, borderline top 10 guy. He either needed to take on a top 5 guy in this fight or someone like Topuria that at least there's that interest of the 2 undefeated fighters. I'm gonna toss this to you for your pick first, but answer me this, like, separate from who you think wins tonight. If one of these guys is a UFC champ or a former UFC champ 5 years from now, which do you think it's more likely that it is?
All right, so that's obviously separate from my actual prediction because Topuria. If one's the champion, I go with Topuria. Bryce Mitchell might be hanging out like Kanye West like a year from now. It's such a fucking good division, though. Like, we always talk about different divisions. 145 is definitely in the running for best division. We talk about, we have the pound for pound best fighter in the world, in my opinion, Alex Volkanovski. You have the all-time great in Max Holloway. You have the Korean Zombie and Brian Ortega and Calvin Kattar and Josh Emmett and Arnold. I mean, not an undefeated guy. And I know undefeated in the UFC, Arnold Allen. These 2 guys, Mosov, Evelev, like even guys that have losses but are like rising up, like Jonathan Pierce. I mean, it's such a good division. And this fight, I agree. I'm okay with whatever they would have done. Like, these guys keep winning. Eventually, they have to match each other. But if they went the opposite, if they went, say, one of these guys against Calvin Kattar, one of these guys against Brian Ortega or Korean Zombie or something like that, I'm okay with that too. As far as this matchup, holy crap, this is the best one fight on the card. And I'm really interested in what we're going to talk about on the recap show on what's next for them, because what's next for them might be a number one contender matchup. I know you said it might be one and then that, but
that's at worst.
That's worse, yeah.
Yeah, like the winner of this fight is at worst like one more, like 2 more wins away. Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously we're talking about Volkanovski's moving up, and does he come back to featherweight and do they unify the title with the winner of Yair Rodriguez and Josh Emmett? Do they, because that's the interim title, but a lot of people believe, myself included, that Arnold Allen probably should have got that interim title shot. Mm-hmm. But if one of these guys blows away the other guy, it's not out of the realm of possibility of them kind of obviously unify the belt, or if that belt doesn't get unified and Volkanovski just gives up 145, that these guys jump. Like, if Bryce Mitchell gets a twister on Ilia Topuria, like, give the guy a title shot. I'm sorry, I love Arnold Allen. I do think he got the raw deal out of the trio of guys that were kind of in the running. But if that happens, like, Bryce Mitchell deserves a title shot. If Topuria plunks him with one punch, Topuria deserves a title shot. As far as a stylistic matchup, Bryce Mitchell is a guy, he didn't even win the season of The Ultimate Fighter. That's what's the crazy thing about. And he looked, coming off the Ultimate Fighter show. He looked like a guy that, UFC talent, but not top 10, going to be this unbelievable. No one wants to hit the ground with this guy, as he's like this Terminator. He's a southpaw that used to be a one-dimensional fighter, but now he's a pretty good striker. He does really well to press the action and force his opponents onto the back foot. He has underrated power, and I think a lot of that happens because he lands clean because his opponents are so concerned with the threat of his takedowns. He throws a lot of kicks because, one, he doesn't care if you catch it because he wants to scramble the Sioux anyways, and he's a longer guy for the division. He's good at following those kicks into the pocket where he presses forward. He wants to be the bull. He doesn't want to be the matador and push back. He wants to be the guy pushing you back. He isn't a good enough athlete to just blow through takedowns. Like, he doesn't explode through it, but he uses pressure so well to set up his takedowns where he's kind of getting you back up to the fence where he wants you, and then he can kind of shoot. He's a good wrestler though, so don't think I'm dogging it. He's good at getting a snatch single inside, and when it hits the ground, he is as lead as they come. I mean, he calls himself the best grappler, and he has this confidence about him right now, which again I really want to stress. I'm a big confidence guy. When you believe that you're the best in the world, it can go a really long way.
It's the only intangible that matters.
Yeah, it can, obviously within reason, if you're not even close, but these guys who have these unbelievable doubts and these all-time greats have this unshakable confidence. And Mitchell almost has that right now. He's good in scrambles. He's constantly moving his hips and following the hips. When you're trying to get away from him, you can't grab a roll with him. He just follows it. Incredible top control, super slick back takes. The guy has a twister win. He almost had Charles Rosa in a twister a bunch of times. He's got really good flexibility. We go back to that Charles Rosa fight, and again, I don't think that's aged well, but still, he made a black belt look like he was a white belt. He can be taken down, but and a lot of that has to do because he look for switches and scrambles and stuff. But he's so good, even if you take him down, he'll scramble and he'll end up being the person in the better position. Topuria, he's much more of a traditional fighter than what you get from Bryce Mitchell. Bryce Mitchell, he's unorthodox. His rise is not as Bryce Mitchell is much more surprising, his rise, as Topuria, when you saw her as soon as he walked in, as okay, this guy's the next big thing. Yeah. He's a wrestle boxer who is great on the feet and on the ground. He jumps into range where he lands hard, short, tight hooks. Kind of always reminds me of like a Chad Mendez type, or like a Dennis Bermudez, this short, small wrestle boxer who gets inside, is pretty effective. He's accurate. He loves his overhand right. It's powerful. He's got huge power. His knockout of Jai Herbert is one of the cleanest punches you'll ever see. And he sets up a lot of his power shots by working inside, coming up with a shot to the rib and then throwing that overhand right. He did struggle a little bit to get inside of Herbert. It took him a little while to get inside, but once he got his range, he found his timing. He was deadly. He showed that he could eat some shots. Herbert was landing some good shots in him, so he showed he has a good chin to get inside. And he's a very good wrestler. He has a Greco-Roman background where he's got incredible hip control, whether it's defending takedowns or just getting it on the hips. He's suplex Yusuf Salal. He's a BJJ black belt who does really well on the ground, advances position. He has a submission threat. He's aggressive to get subs. He loves traditional wrestling head attacks, Darce chokes, anacondas. He loves guillotines, another one, head and arm triangle chokes. And he showed even though he's a wrestler at first, he showed that he's can roll with the best one. He went into some tough positions with Ryan Hall, and then he gets him in, which says a lot. And he shows some really good ground and pound in that fight. Man, this is the best fight on the card. I really think it should be the co-main event. I don't think it should be open in the card. I have flip-flopped a little bit on this fight. I am worried about the length of Mitchell, but the power of Topuria is just, to me, is such an equalizer. Add in that he's probably the better wrestler that makes this fight so extremely tough. I say Topuria lands some big shots. I think he actually wins some of these scrambles. I think we're gonna have some unbelievable scrambles if the fight hits the ground. I think it might look a lot like what's that fight we had a couple months ago? Mateusz Gamrot and
Armin Sarukian.
Yeah. Sorry. So yeah. But no. Sorry. Mateusz Gamrot and Armin Sarukian. We had these unbelievable scrambles, and like I think we could have that. If Mitchell gets his back, he might finish it, and don't be shocked if Mitchell submits him. But I think Topuria is going to be on top for more portions. Give me Topuria by decision and like an absolute incredible fight that to me is just like an automatic lock for fight of the night.
Yeah, I love the breakdown there. Based on merit, obviously this should be the co-main event. I understand why the co-main event is what it is, but ironically, after Paddy Pimblett, Bryce Mitchell is absolutely the person on this card who is second most likely to be on the Sherdog front page for something he said.
Oh yeah,
you know, like,
say what you want about him. He's marketable.
He's extremely marketable. Like he's and he's like the love or hate type of marketable.
Yeah.
Like either you think he's just like a charming weirdo, or you think he's like, yeah,
or he's the other thing we got to get to you.
Yeah, he's like this buffoon that's like espouses like actually dangerous ideas, or is just
which he is that too.
Yeah, I mean, don't forget that the first thing he was famous for in the UFC before the Twister was shredding his own nutsack with an electric drill in his pocket.
He's like that crazy uncle. I have a cousin. God, I hope they don't watch this. Same cousin, son of Frank Stallone's kid, who's somehow crazier than my uncle Ralph. And he's batty, and he's like, I don't know, he's just like mental illnesses or something. But I love him, but he's also like nuts. So like when you're around other people, you have a cookout, like, hey, that's my crazy cousin. Like, don't listen to what he said. That's like someone saying that about Bryce Mitchell. Like, yeah, that's my crazy cousin.
Yeah, like somewhere at the intersection of I hospitalized myself by putting an electric drill in my pocket without flipping the safety thing, and I actually think Joe Rogan is afraid to debate me about the flat. Like, there's only one person in the middle of that Venn diagram, and it is Bryce fucking Mitchell.
Joe Rogan talks to like some of those brilliant people on who's. Hold on. Joe Rogan talks to some fucking whack jobs.
Well, that's the thing. He talks to geniuses and buffoons, and none of them intimidate him. You think he's scared to talk to Bryce Mitchell?
Joe Rogan will debate Jordan Peterson and who else is he had on? Candace Owens and Matthew Walsh. I think he can debate you, Bryce Mitchell.
I'm at the very least, I'm sure
we're not trying to get put. I mean, anybody knows this. Me and you are the two opposite spectrums of politics.
Yeah.
And Bryce Mitchell, I don't know. It's okay. It's okay to have someone just because someone votes for the same person as you voted for, you can still call that person a nut job.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'm routinely embarrassed by some.
Yeah, your party's full of them.
Yeah, I'm routinely embarrassed by some of the people that vote the same way I do. That's
see this real quick. This is what America and all the whole world needs to be about. Like, we're so different, but it's all love.
It's all love, you know. It is funny that between these two guys, Topuria is the guy that's more likely to be forced up to lightweight by not being able to make the cut anymore, and it is because he is a block of muscle. I mean, he really is. He's Josh Emmett with better posture. Like, Emmett is built like an orc. Like, he's just got, like, his shoulders are kind of hunched over, and he's got huge muscles everywhere. And he looks like if he stood up, if he stood up straight, he'd be 6 feet tall.
Josh Emmett's like running through the forest saying, "Find the half lengths."
Find the half lengths. Yes. Topuria, the scary thing about him is, I mean, he has vulnerabilities. It's always hard to point out when you have an undefeated fighter, especially one who's just dominated in every fight. it's tough to point out where the weaknesses are, or you're like, oh, okay, first time they lose a fight, it's going to be because blank.
Sure.
Topuria is one of those guys where it is hard to point out. With Mitchell, it's a little easier, although it's getting harder as his striking evolves. Because 3 years ago would have been like, okay, yeah, the first guy that Mitchell can't take down, he's just going to lose a bad decision and look like he's like been hit by a lawnmower at the end of it. That's not as much the case anymore. But if this thing stays on the feet the whole time, I think it does still heavily favor Topuria. More power, and while Mitchell's taller and should have reach on him, Topuria just finished fighting Jai Herbert, who is a 6'1" lightweight, and absolutely destroyed him. So I mean, Topuria is always the shorter guy, and he's figured out how to navigate that. It's interesting that even up through kind of when he came up to the UFC through Brave CF, he was really a wrestler, grappler specialist. I mean, his first 7 professional wins were all submissions, and I don't think he's had one since then. Or maybe he had one in Brave CF, but since he's gotten to the UFC, he's been knocking people out. And in some cases, he's been knocking them out on the ground, but that was just a Hall fight, and that's because Hall was instantly reduced to doing Imanari rolls and pulling guard and just desperately trying to get the fight to the ground. I mean, Jackson and Herbert, he blew up on the feet. Mitchell will certainly test his luck on the feet early. You mentioned that he has the uninhibited kicking game of a man who not only is unafraid of being taken down, but actually wishes you would, because, even if you take him down off a kick, so he is theoretically on the bottom as you're going down, he's so good at scrambles and getting kind of sweeps in transition that he trusts himself to come out on the best side of that. That's a tough formula to carry into a fight against Ilia Topuria, who is an extremely savvy grappler himself, if he's maybe not quite as exotic and creative as Mitchell. And then just there would be no way to measure this objectively, but he just seems like he might be the strongest guy in the division physically. Just incredibly physically strong. Yeah, I'm leaning Topuria here, and it doesn't it doesn't really kill Mitchell's prospect cachet for me. For one thing, there'll be a few people that beat Mitchell along the way, but he still has a good chance of fighting for a title somewhere along the line, either here or at 155 as he gets older and just puts on more weight. But this particular matchup, I think, is a rough one for him. I can't imagine Mitchell being able to pull off just the ground domination that he did on Rosa. I have a tough time picturing him getting takedowns as easily as he did against Feely, against Topuria. I think this probably stays on the feet for the most part until Topuria wants it any different. I think he'll hurt Mitchell on the feet. I think once it goes to the ground, it gets really interesting because Topuria won't be able to just unleash unbridled ground and pound. I mean, he was even having to be a little careful with Ryan Hall, and just Ryan Hall is older and nowhere near the athlete Mitchell is. So Topuria will have to be wary when they're on the ground. He could get caught. It would be interesting to see him lose his first fight that way, but I don't think that's the likely outcome. I think the likely outcome is Topuria winning at least 2 through the 3 rounds, maybe all 3, with a nice mix of getting the better of him on the feet and getting in some sporadic, effective ground and pound and top control. And who knows, maybe even trying a submission attempt or 2. It would be interesting to see Mitchell having to defend himself against a really good grappler, actually on the offense against him. Because normally when he's on the ground, the other guy is just trying not to drown. But give me Topuria by decision here. One bonus question for you about this. This fight was made within the last month or so because back at the beginning of November, Mitchell was supposed to fight another one of the kind of formation of undefeated featherweights moving up the rankings in Movsar Evloev. Do you like that fight as well as this one, or do you like this one better? And no tape study, off the top of your head, who would you have picked between Mitchell and Evloev?
Jeez. I think I would take Mitchell. I don't know. It's such a fucking good fight.
Yeah.
Evlo is a little smaller.
Yeah.
And that's the concern. Like he actually looks like he could drop weight, even though he's so good. He's so fast. His I don't know. Probably the threat on the feet of Topuria makes this one a little bit more fun. And Mitchell's talking and Topuria's talking, which always makes it like Topuria talk. Evlo, he's Russian. He's not going to talk. He's just, you know.
Yeah. I'm with you, but there's no bad combination to be made between these three guys.
Yeah, no, I know.
Next up on the UFC 282 main card is a middleweight matchup between Darren Till and Dricus du Plessis. Till, the 29-year-old from Liverpool, is 18-4-1 overall. He is 6-4-1 in the UFC. However, most of that run took place at welterweight, a welterweight run that saw him fight all the way to a title shot against Tyron Woodley. Or no, it wasn't a title shot. It was a title eliminator, wasn't it? Or was Woodley the champ? No, Woodley was the champ.
No, Woodley was champ, yeah.
Okay. A welterweight run that saw him make it all the way to a shot against then champ Tyron Woodley that did not end well for him. He eventually made the most foreseeable move to middleweight ever as a multi-time weight offender at 170. And since moving to the middleweight division, he is 1-2. He won his debut in the division, split decision over Kelvin Gastelum. That was 3 years ago. Came back in 2020, took a unanimous decision over Robert Whittaker in a very close and contentious fight. And then in September of last year, headlined UFC Fight Night 191 against Derek Brunson, where he succumbed to a third-round submission. It is once again another full year later, and he will be looking to get back on track against du Plessis. The 28-year-old South African is 17-2 overall. He is 3-2 since joining the UFC as not the most recognizable name, but one of the more accomplished and promising fighters outside the UFC in his general weight range. I mean, we're talking about a former KSW welterweight champ and a former EFC middleweight and welterweight champ. And since joining the UFC, he has wins over Marcus Perez, Trevin Giles, and Brad Tavares. The most recent of those, the Tavares fight, was a unanimous decision win at UFC 276 back in July. So he'll be looking to make it 4 in a row in the UFC, 6 in a row overall, and he is a moderate favorite to get it done. He is -150, Till +130. Keith, I mentioned earlier on this show that there are a couple matchups on this card where there's some very obvious unifying theme for the two fighters. This is another one. You know, already talked about Chris Curtis and Joaquin Buckley as two fighters who really only took the next step in their career when they moved up from 170 to 185. These guys are two that they've moved up from 170 to 185, but the bigger thing about it is it's difficult to imagine how they ever made 170. In hindsight. I mean, these are two big dudes. They're not the tallest guys in the division. They're both listed at 6 feet tall, and that looks about right. But Darren Till is the biggest welterweight I've ever seen. He's not the tallest, doesn't have the longest arms, but just his build. Like,
remember
he looks like a light heavyweight.
Remember his stare down with Woodley? Just looking down like...
Yeah.
They look like Sylvester Stallone and Hulk Hogan, and they stare down at Rocky 3.
It absolutely did. And when Till fought Stephen Thompson, like Thompson was maybe like an inch taller, but Till just looked 30 pounds heavier just because he's got broad shoulders. He has like thick legs. Most of your big for the division guys accomplish it by having skinny legs. You know, whether you're talking about John Jones or going all the way back to Tito Ortiz. Like, that's not Till. He's just a huge guy. Yeah. And then, you know, du Plessis looks like a fighter out of Central Casting, just jacked, like V-taper. He looks like just a slightly downsized, like Ryan Bader out there. Darren Till, like, he's had a rough enough run recently, and he's been so absent that I've been going back and like almost revising history in my head and wondering if I overrated him at his best. because
Same.
I mean, the guy has fought once a year for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Like when he on the way up to the Woodley fight, the main thing was, I mean, he was still undefeated at the time. I think he was like 15-0-1 or 14-0-1 when he got to Woodley, but he was also fighting a lot, which was impressive for a guy that obviously has a huge weight cut. You know, he leading up to the Woodley fight, I think he fought like 4 times in 15 months or something. So he stayed busy. He was beating increasingly good fighters. I mean, the Donald Cerrone crushing was still pretty impressive in 2017. Stephen Thompson fight, surprising that he got a title shot off of that, considering he barely won, if that, and he blew weight badly. But since then, it's just not been a good look for him. He's been out a lot. He's been injured. And when he's been in the cage, he's just not looked great. Woodley thrashed him. He had a good first round against Masvidal, but in hindsight, if you rewatch that fight, that is just Jorge Masvidal measuring him. And, you know, like by the time Masvidal threw the combination that knocked him out, I think he could have thrown it blindfolded. Like that was just Till getting set up by a better boxer. The Gastelum win has not aged well, and he looked good against Whitaker. I did think that, but
Yeah, but still lost.
Still lost. But like that's really the biggest signs of life he's shown in the last 5 years. I'm kind of surprised the line is as close as it is, because Du Plessis has exceeded my expectations. Like in his run in the UFC, he's been more versatile than I expected. You know, he has a lot of subs on his record, but once he got to kind of top level competition, you know, those have kind of dried up. And yeah, he's just looked better in the UFC than I expected. Like, he was having a pretty close fight with Giles and then caught him. Like, Giles probably won the first round, but it was close. And then he crushed him in the second. The Tavares fight was a really solid win for him. Tavares is like one of the greatest long-term consistent gatekeepers in UFC history. Like, I feel more confident in Du Plessis in this fight than minus 150. And again, we're not a betting show. I know some people take our picks and kind of use them as like part of their handicapping spreadsheet. If I were a betting man, I am not. Like, Du Plessis sounds like a value at minus 150. Like, there's nothing here to tell me that Till's going to suddenly be better and like trending in the opposite direction than he has for the last 2 or 3 years. And even if he were the exact same guy that lost the Brunson Whitaker fights, I don't think he has a great style matchup against Du Plessis. Du Plessis, as big as he is, he's a very good boxer himself, and he is a better wrestler and grappler. Like, I have Du Plessis by decision here and feel pretty confident in it. I don't do a lock of the night because I'd get it wrong and I'd feel like a dumbass for the next week.
Lock it in, Ben.
Yeah, and I ain't locking this in, but I'm pretty comfortable on this one. I like Du Plessis for sure.
Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't find my notes. If you saw me looking away from the camera, I couldn't find my notes on Darren Till. I threw him out 5 years ago when he last time he fought. Yeah, dude. See, Darren Till, it's tough because every single time I'm like, I give up on him. You see a fight and he's like, he looks great. And you mentioned it, he's a humongous guy. He's got to be just as big as Du Plessis, if maybe even bigger. He's a massive guy. Southpaw, that he likes to work in that mid range. He uses feints well. He's got some quick hands. He's good at beating his opponent at the point of contact. You go back to like that elbow he landed on Robert Whitaker. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Like, picked up his timing. His left hand is his best strike. He also likes that like lead right uppercut. But he can be trigger shy at times. A perfect example is Stephen Thompson. Even like a win over Kelvin Gastelum, like he wasn't throwing a lot of volume. He's got good power. He hurt Robert Whitaker. He hurt Stephen Thompson. But he can load up a little bit and try to end the fight with one punch. His chin, like you mentioned that Jorge Masvidal fight, I give him a little bit of pass on his chin, being that was at 170. He keeps his chin high. He gives himself a big target, and he was dropped by Robert Whitaker, so there is a little bit of concerns there. He generates a lot of power because of the way he stands. He has such a huge Conor McGregor type wide base, but it also leaves him open to leg kicks. And the biggest thing about him, and again, he's faced some good wrestlers. Wrestlers been able to hold him down. Tyron Woodley was able to hold him down. Derek Brunson was able to keep him down. And in fairness, he did stop some takedowns from Robert Whittaker. But worse than stopping takedowns is he's struggled to get back up. Yeah, Whittaker, Woodley and Brunson were both able to pin him down on the canvas. Whittaker did not. Like, he was able to get up from Whittaker, but Whittaker's undersized in the division, so it's much harder for him to hold him down. And not to mention, like, Whittaker's wrestling is very overrated. Like, he's no Bo Nickal out there. Like, people pretend like he is. Duplessis, again, I agree with a lot of things. He's been much better than I thought he was, and he does a lot of things that I don't think is good, but he's super tough and he's intelligent. Duplessis, he can fight out of both stances. He has deceivingly long arms, and he lands. I've said this before. He lands on opponents when they think he's out of range, and he's still landing because of those long arms. He's a counter striker that he has defensive holes. He backs straight up. He pillars. He hates being pressed back, but he makes up for high volume. He's a combination thrower. He has a lot of tells. He does this like jerky thing before he attacks, like almost like he like a routine. If you're like a batter in baseball, he like almost takes like and then he kind of like, all right, gets himself psyched up before he's going to come and attack, and he's going to get blasted. Like it was Asanya would have knocked him into next week for some things like that. But he's got good power. We saw him starch Marcus Perez. We saw him starch Trevin Giles. He has some spinning attacks. He's got a good kicking game, especially his calf kicks. He's not a great wrestler, but he will go for some takedowns. But he does have a submission game. But most of all, he has really good cardio. We saw that in his last fight. He can go hard all 15 minutes. He outworked Brad Tavares in his last fight. I think this is a really good scrap because I think there's some I think it's a step up in competition, Duplessis. I think it's the right test for Darren Till if there's anything left. If Darren Till loses this one, it's kind of like, honestly, it might be prelim time for Darren Till. Man, Duplessis has some major holes, but he can make up for it with toughness and output. He could land a takedown in 2 until and just hold him down. I really want to take Till. I think he's the cleanest striker. I really do. I think he has the power advantage. I don't trust him much either. So I flip-flopped. When this fight was first announced, I was like, oh, man, like Duplessis got to eat up Darren Till. And even though I think Darren Till's a better, like, more technically sound fighter, like Duplessis has this thing in him. He makes up for it. He has a little bit of, like, Julian Erosa type game to him where he makes up with it. And then I started thinking about, you know what? If it stays on the feet, Till, I think Till can crack. I think he can scrap. I think he's a technically sound striker, and he has that skill set that can expose those holes in Duplessis because Duplessis is wild and countered. And I've seen guys like Trevin Giles. Before he knocked out Trevin Giles was piecing him up a little bit.
Yeah.
So I know I'm picking this fight wrong. I know it. So don't say, oh, Keith took this one. I'm taking, like, no, don't do that. Like, I say Till gets an early lead, but Duplessis kind of comes on strong late, and I think we're gonna have a war. I think both guys gonna have their moments. But I think Till's gonna hold on to the victory. I think he's gonna get ahead, and I'm going the opposite of you. I guess I'm going with the I'm gonna say Till turned back the clocks a little bit and gets a little buzz back on him. I say Till wins a decision and an upset.
There you go. A little bit of dissension. And here's the thing about Till. He's a talker. He was well on his way to being a star before he started fighting once a year and losing.
Why he skipped the line at welterweight.
Yeah. It's why he skipped the line. If he wins here, it's all back. I mean, a cocky dude from Liverpool. He can join the club with McCann and Pimblett, and they can ride that
you know
rocket.
what?
Yeah.
Say he starts them. Say he has that, he's kept on the mic, does one of those like he did, I'm not scared of anybody kind of thing. It's not a bad bounce back fight for Israel Adesanya if you don't want to give him the title shot right away.
Absolutely. Yeah. That I mean, if he does like starch Duplessis, cut some sort of promo, like
Yeah.
I mean, I know he doesn't train at Next Gen with McCann and Pimblett, like he's very famously came up training in Brazil, but like she comes running into the cage and like throws beer at him, like they cut to Pimblett like screaming in like the green room. Yeah, like dude, he's headlining his next fight. Third from the top at UFC 282 is a welterweight matchup between Robbie Lawler and Santiago Ponzinibbio. Lawler, the 40-year-old Iowa native. I know he was born in California. Look, he's Iowa. He's Mr. Iowa. 29-16 with 1 no contest overall. He is 14-10 across 2 separate stints with the UFC, separated by over a decade. So consider them 2 separate things. He was 4-3 as the original Red Hot prospect from 2002 to 2004. Came back from his wilderness years in 2013 and has been 10-7 since then, a run that saw him make it to the pinnacle of the sport. He won the UFC welterweight title in 2014 from Johnny Hendricks. He defended a couple of times, lost it in 2016, and that's when all the wheels fell off. Starting with losing his belt to Tyron Woodley in July of 2016, he is 2-6 since then. And one of the wins was over Nick Diaz. That was a pause for effect. Most recently, he appeared at UFC 276 in July, getting knocked out in the second round by Brian Barberena. So he'll look to, I guess, get back on track, have a good retirement fight. I don't know. Against Ponzinibbio. The 36-year-old Argentinian is 28-6 overall. He is 10-5 in the UFC, which sounds good, but the disturbing part is from 2018 to 2021, he had an absence from the sport for a little over 2 years due to injury and illness. Since coming back last January, he is 1-3. He has lost to Li Jingliang, beat Miguel Baeza, and lost decisions to Jeff Neal and Michel Pereira. The most recent of those, the Pereira loss, was in May at UFC Fight Night Home versus Vieira. Despite being 1-3 in his last 4, he is, I think he's the biggest favorite on the card. Ponzinibbio -410, Lawler +330. Keith, I'm definitely tossing this one to you first, but I mean, this is 2 different kinds of shot fighter in 2 different phases of being shot. Tell me who wins, how, and why I shouldn't kill myself afterwards.
Yeah, no, please don't kill yourself. Yeah, this fight, this is the worst fight on the main card. It's one of the worst fights on the entire card altogether. And,
I'm sorry, let me ask you one question. If Robbie Lawler had a fight on this contract, you knew you had to give him one because if you cut him, Bellator was absolutely going to sign him. Is this the kind of fight you would have given him?
No, I let Bellator have him.
Okay, assuming you're the UFC and you don't like letting the UFC have Robbie Lawler, you'd much rather give them Corey Anderson.
No, I use Robbie Lawler. I mean, it sounds terrible, but I use Robbie Lawler to get over the next guy in the division. Like who's the
bounce back fight for Sean Brady is Robbie Lawler.
Or some kind of some like that, or another prospect coming up. Like I'm trying to get somebody.
Jack Dillon out of Atlanta gets Robbie Lawler.
Jack, that's what I would do. That's the exact guy. Like let him get beat up by Jack Dillon out of Atlanta. It'd be an absolute slaughter. But at least you pass up the next guy, not the guy who's 1-3. It's why I wasn't into the Nick Diaz fight. I'm like, if you're gonna, I was one when Nick Diaz come back saying, give him Shmaev. Let's get a star. And this is before Shmaev take another step to start him. Why you use him for Robbie Lawler to rematch a fight that only the hardcores even remember. They, and not even the hardcores, but the hardcores have been around for a long time. Robbie Lawler. I mean, when I say this is a bad fight, it's going to be entertaining. It's Robbie Lawler, so I didn't mean like that. I just mean it's not one I'm going to be excited about because, yeah, it might be fun, it might be action, but I've seen a lot of fun and action fights. I've seen them a million times. Like I don't want to see the ghost of Robbie Lawler anymore. He's a southpaw that his volume is gone, is shot, and due to his age, and this helps him keep from gassing out. But we saw in his last fight, he simply can't match the volume. I mean, when Brian Barberino put volume on him, I mean, Robbie Lawler was just overwhelmed. But if we're being honest, even in his prime, he took big chunks of time off in the cage. We think about wars he had with Carlos Condit. He was gun shy at times in that fight. People forget about. A lot of people think Lawler versus McDonald 2 is the greatest fight of all time. I don't. I'm not one of them. Obviously it's a fantastic fight. Don't get me wrong, but people forget that the very first round they stood and stared at each other and didn't do anything because he had to kind of pace himself. Now, when he's in the mid-range, he still fires off some bombs. He can get in the pocket. He can unload some big hooks. He has those legendary uppercuts. I'm assuming he still has some pop. I mean, he did briefly hurt Neil Magny in a fight where Magny still destroyed him. He has kicks. He can still kick really hard to the body. He comes from a wrestling background, but I mean, his wrestling has been gone forever. I mean, the last time Robbie Lawler got a takedown, Ronald Reagan was president. He can't stop takedowns anymore either. Neil Magny took him down with ease. Colby Covington was like, it looked like he was just drilling takedowns. He's always struggled to get back up. He's never been a submission threat. He has one submission win in his career, and that was 17 years ago. So I don't think Robbie Lawler is getting a submission on Santiago Ponzinibbio. But the biggest thing is, and I think this is what your concern was, everyone's concern is I'm worried about his chin. Especially considering like his main defense is rolling with punches, which I've spoken before. It's not my least favorite defense. My least favorite defense is pillaring, but it's my second one. He's taken so much damage. He's taken as much damage as anybody besides, say, Darren Elkins and Bigfoot Silva. Like he just he's been in legendary wars, and I think about these all-time greats when we've seen them hanging on for too long and seeing them get hurt bad. I think seeing Lyoto Machida get beat up, seeing Chuck Liddell get knocked out, seeing Shogun Rua, like it's going to happen. It's already been happening to Robbie Lawler, but it's going to have the big, huge punch. There's Frank Yeager, look it up in the lights. It's going to be the same thing with there's a big punch and there's Robbie Lawler either face up staring at the lights or face down staring at the canvas. It's if he keeps fighting the UFC, it's going to happen. Ponzinibbio, he's a high output striker. He's got some pretty good footwork. He moves well in and out of range. He doesn't get enough credit for his intelligence because he is a blood and guts kind of fighter where he gets in these wars. He's all bloody, but he's got a lot of technical skills. He sets some traps. He uses feints wells. DC pointed out in one of his fights how he was just like winning the foot battle so he could line up his straight right. He's explosive. He's got quick hands. He throws a lot of combinations. His left hook is his best strike. He's got pop, hard calf kicks. He's 1-3, but he's fought some really good guys during that run. And he definitely isn't the guy before the long layoff. He has taken a step back. That happens based on his style and age and decline and just everything you expect. But he's still a good fighter. He's still a good test for anybody. He will wrestle occasionally. He took down Jeff Neal. He took down Michel Pereira in back-to-back fights. If there is a takedown, even though Robbie Lawler is the guy comes from a wrestling background, if it's a takedown, I think Ponzinibbio takes down Lawler. I mean, Ponzinibbio we talk about how tough Lawler is. Ponzinibbio was insanely tough too. I mean, look at the shots he ate from Michel Pereira and he kept moving forward. The shots he ate from Jeff Neal and was still pressing the action. He's got good cardio. He won't slow down. And he's mentally strong. If Robbie Lawler hits him with a shot and buckles him, he'll bite down his mouth and he'll throw down. I don't think this is going to be a slugfest. I think this is going to be a slaughter. I think Robbie Lawler's shot. I think he gets. I mean, I saw him get battered by Brian Barberino, and I think Pons at this point is still much better than Brian Barberino. He hits way harder. I think we get one of those moments where we see an all-time great getting laid out, and I'm on the recap show saying it'd be a crime to see this guy fight again. I don't want to see this happen, but I think it's gonna. I think Pon's gonna lay him out first round.
Yeah, I mean, I want to keep this fairly short just because, this is a 14 fight card and we've got the co-main and main up ahead of us. I mean, I could, and if I knew this was his retirement fight, I would go into just a 10-minute spiel about how he's that rare Shogun Hua type fighter that feels like he's had 3 different careers.
And we'll do that in the recap if he does retire.
Yeah, or die. Like, knock on wood, that he does not. But yeah, you said it perfectly. If Brian Barberena just is overwhelming Robbie Lawler, then even this extremely dilapidated version of Santiago Ponzinibbio can absolutely do that, and he's going to do it with just as much volume, but more power and just nastiness and the threat of wrestling. Lawler's been overwhelmed, but he still isn't to the point where he's just getting absolutely short-circuited by a single shot. I mean, ironically, the last person to really do that to him was Woodley. So I'm going to say he makes it to the second round, but he loses the first round bad, and people on Twitter are like, dude, throw in the towel. Nobody throws in the towel. But give me Ponzinibbio by second round knockout, not TKO, but like out. And yeah, it'll be a bummer. The co-main event of UFC 282 is a lightweight matchup between Paddy Pimblett and Jared Gordon. Pimblett, the 27-year-old from Liverpool, is 19-3 overall. He is 3-0 since joining the UFC as a former 2-division champ in Cage Warriors, former featherweight and lightweight champ, a little bit like somebody else that got pretty famous in this sport. Him, Irish, not British, though. Most recently, he fought back in July, choking out Jordan Levitt in the second round. Prior to that, he had beaten Rodrigo Vargas by first-round submission and survived a firefight against Luigi Vendramini to knock him out late in the first round. So he's going to look to make it 4 straight in the UFC, 6 straight overall, and continue his skyrocketing into one of the biggest stars in the UFC. And standing in his way will be Gordon. The 34-year-old New York native is 19-5 overall. He is 7-4 since joining the UFC as a former CFFC featherweight champ. He won his last time out. It was a unanimous decision win over Leonardo Santos at UFC 278 in August. Prior to that, he got choked out in the third round by Grant Dawson back in April. And prior to that, he was on a 3-fight win streak. Odds here do favor the Brit. He is minus 200. Gordon plus 170 on the comeback. Keith, obviously, I mean, you love trash talkers. I enjoy him as well. I like fighters with big personalities. And I always like the ones that, on top of just being able to just talk shit on their opponent and make people laugh at them, are not afraid to like make people laugh at themselves and be a little self-deprecating. Last week, somebody asked Paddy Pimblett what he would be if he were not a fighter, and his answer was diabetic.
Yeah. That's
funny.
funny.
Who wins this one, and how? And answer me this. How do you like the way they've matched Pimblett going forward? And do you think he can turn into one of those fighters whose popularity is not dependent on wins and losses, like the Diaz brothers type thing?
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever have someone like Nate Diaz, because he's so different. There's never been anybody in the UFC that's like Nate Diaz.
Sure.
Because it's not an act. it's him. You know,
not even the specific personality, but like substitute Donald Cerrone then.
No, I know. I know what you're saying. I'm just saying, like, not to the scale of
sure.
Nate. And Nate is also always he's got the right counterpart so many times. You know, I mean, the ultimate one being Conor McGregor.
Sure.
But like even like little things like Nate's, even when things go bad for Nate, he gets the right person. Like, I mean, he loses to Jorge Masvidal, but that was like he just lined up perfectly with Jorge Masvidal when Masvidal became popular. Chimaev missing weight gave him more stuff to be like claim he beat Chimaev. Like him getting in like a fight with Habib and his team like very briefly turns into wow, Nate's such a gangster, he'll even fight like Habib, you know. Uh I I think he can be a star in England like that. I think if he starts losing in America, it won't be as popular. It'll tally off a little bit. It's same with what we just saw with Molly McCann. Molly McCann's, I mean, she talked about it, how popular she got. I don't think she'll be as popular in the next fight. She'll still get a big pop in England if they get her the right matchup in England, but it won't be as popular. He's funny. He says some things, but we've seen other guys like that who are funny. And I mean, we just talked about Darren Till. I mean, he rose up like that, and he was a star feeling. This matchup, as far as matching him right, no, I don't think this is the right matchup. And I'll tell you why. One, Jared Gordon's a huge threat. Like, Jared Gordon is a big step up in competition. Jared Gordon's it's a fight. Like, what does Petty gain from winning? It's all risk and no reward. And what I mean by that is, like, Gordon's the best guy he will face so far in the UFC. But this fight isn't in England. It isn't in New York. Like, at least put him in that New York card last month. So English will travel. They will travel for him. I think he'll still have a lot of fans there. But if he wins, he doesn't get any credit from casuals because casuals don't know who Jared Gordon is. Doesn't know it's a huge test. If he loses, the benefit of, like, at least Blanchfield makes a little bit of sense because you're building Blanchfield off of McCann. She's a future. Jared Gordon's not. No. So it's hard to find the person where he would get credit for beating, but if he loses, they make a star. Like, I don't know if there's anybody in the division right now that makes perfect sense that way. So you got to kind of pick one or the other. I would have picked the first one. I would have went with a guy that it would seem like a big win if he won at the time, and I would have went with the guy we just saw last week. I would have went with Clay Guida. Give him a name. Casuals know him. He's the guy bouncing around. You could have a fun stare down at the weigh-ins and stuff.
The hair game would be something else, wouldn't it?
Yeah, like that fight to me makes so much more sense. And they were like in the same I fought a week ago. Like they're in the same calendar, time frame. Like a fight like that would make so. And it sounds better in the co-main event. Clay Guida, Patty Pimblett's first big test, UFC Hall of Famer. Or side note, I hate when they call you guys UFC Hall of Famer for a fight. It's just weird, but they're in. He's in if you want to say that. Like, you could sell it. Oh, UFC Hall of Famer. How many wins he has? 25 wins in UFC. Whatever it is. Like, you could sell that more. Even though at this point, I think Gordon might be a tougher test than Clay Guida.
I think he absolutely is. Yeah.
So, and you know how I felt about the whole keep him in England as far as long as possible as you can. Pimlet, he's on the feet. He's a long range striker. He's a pretty good athlete. He's a better athlete than he gets credited for. He moves well. He hits harder than he gets credit for. We saw that when he starts Luigi Fioravanti. That said, he has a lot of defense holes. He's always been very hittable. He drops his hands. He backs straight up. He doesn't like being pressured. He's got a good kicking game. Especially from the outside, because he's a long and rangy guy himself. Good kicks from range. He likes that, like, question mark kick, goes back to that athleticism where he's a good athlete. He'll throw some flying knees, but all of his kicks set up a lot of his wrestling, his scrambles. He's not an explosive penetration step wrestler. He's more. I actually think he's better when he gets in the clinch, upper body tripped kind of wrestling. He had a beautiful judo throw on Kazula Vargas in their fight. So he's not because he's a grappling wrestler. So he doesn't. He's not going to go shoot in, miss that knee tap. He's not going to do that. He's going to just shoot in, dive in, get sprawled on. It is what it is. He's a terrible defensive wrestler. Some of that comes from he'll pull guard. Some of it comes from jumping guillotines. But he's a true threat on his back. He's flexible. He's really a submission threat everywhere. Subbing Jordan Levitt to me, that was a statement. But that's what Jordan Levitt is known for. He's supposed to be the submission artist, and he didn't just catch him. It wasn't like they had these great scrambles and Patty just, Levitt made a mistake and he caught him. No, Patty had him in multiple submissions before, he finally finished Levitt up, which to me is more impressive than if he just caught him right away. He was chaining submissions together, and I like that. Now, Jared Gordon, he's a weak athlete, but he's got good volume. And, I mean, you look at his Danny Chavez fight, a decent fighter. He beat him up with just volume. He's pretty technically sound. He's a boxer that kind of keeps everything in tight, works the body well. He does have some defensive holes. One is that when he's striking, he drops his hands a little bit. And when he defends, he pillows a lot. But he can get inside the clinch. He can grind in there. He can wrestle a little bit. He's a much better grappler than you think of. Like you take like a Chris Fishgold, he out wrestled Chris Fishgold, which was pretty good accomplishment. He's definitely a top side grappler. He wants to work from the top, and he has some good ground and pound. So this is a tough fight. I really want to take Gordon. If I'm betting, I'm staying away from it. I think the line should be much closer. I think it should be a pick'em. I've never been a Paddy Pimblett guy. I've come around him a little bit more. I definitely don't think he's a top 15 talent. I don't think he'll ever be that. I think he's got a lot of defensive holes. And Gordon's cardio really worries me, being that he can press a hard pace. But that said, I'm going to go with Pimblett. He showed me something when he submitted Jordan Levitt. Straight grappling, I think Jordan Levitt might be a better submission artist than Jared Gordon is. Not that is everything in this fight, but that makes a statement. I think Patty, big moment, co-main event. He seems like a guy that can rise in a big moment. I think he finds something. Second round submission, Patty Pimblett.
Yeah, I'm with you on basically all of that. Gordon, definitely kind of an underrated, unsung, solid mid-level guy in the division now for years. I mean, I just think of him as this constant also ran, but what he really is a guy who keeps on racking up win streaks against mid-level lightweights, and then when the UFC just has no other choice but to give him a step up, then we see his ceiling, each time. Like, one of my first memories of Gordon is he's the first guy that kind of showed me how much Charles Oliveira had turned the corner as a striker, where Oliveira just crushed him with 2 punches just because, like you mentioned, Gordon tends to drop his hands. He especially tends to drop his hands against a fighter he thinks wants to take him down, which was absolutely the case with Oliveira, and Oliveira just crushed him with a little short right, then I think he knocked him completely out with an uppercut on his way down. You mentioned that he's a pretty good wrestler and he's a good grappler, but does better from top position. That was definitely the case in the Grant Dawson fight. And yeah, you get a pass for losing to Grant Dawson. I think Grant Dawson's a top 10 fighter on talent.
Yeah, he's good.
Needs to pick a weight class, make weight, and then string together the wins and the rest will come. But Dawson took him down pretty easily, and Gordon was stuck once he had him there. Those 2 losses by Gordon represent kind of the 2 things that I think Pimblett will be capable of doing to him. Like, Pimblett is nowhere near as sharp a striker as Charles Oliveira, obviously, but, he has a little bit of pop, and Gordon's defensive lapses on the feet are exacerbated when he's taking on someone that he knows wants to take him down. That's I could see Pimblett just completely surprising Gordon with a punch combo or a high kick that just catches him with his hands down and hurts him bad. If they go to the ground and Pimblett lands on top, I think Gordon's going to have a tough time for the rest of that round if he gets out of that round. I mean, he's only been tapped out once in his career, and it was by Dawson. But that's something Pimblett could replicate. I mean, he's not as athletic and powerful as Dawson, but he's a very good, he's a good grappler, period. He's fine in top position and does a pretty good job of hunting for submissions while keeping position secure. I don't love this matchup from a promotional standpoint for all the reasons you mentioned, but from a, well, let's see how much Paddy Pimblett has got before we put him in a terrible mismatch. I do kind of like this one. Give me Pimblett, and I'm going to say Pimblett gets a late stoppage, like something in the third round on the ground, like either a submission or a TKO on the ground. Just Pimblett, despite, having a serious weight cut due to getting ridiculously fat between fights, and despite pushing a pretty furious pace early in fights, has shown decent cardio. Gordon has not. So if someone's rolling downhill at the end of this fight, it's Pimblett. Give me Pimblett by I'm going to say third round submission, and the hype machine will really, really get cranking. That brings us to the main event of UFC 282, promoted to such within the last week or so. It is a light heavyweight matchup between former champ Jan Blachowicz and, if the opinions of many are to be believed, future champ Magomed Ankalaev. Blachowicz, the 39-year-old Pole, who turns 40 in about 2 months, is 29-9 overall. He is 12-6 in the UFC. He won his last time out, bit of a strange one, but was in the middle of a pretty good fight with Alexander Rakic in the headliner of UFC on ESPN 36 back in May, when Rakic's knee gave out in gruesome fashion, picked up a TKO win in a way that nobody wants to. Just one more example of one of the stories of 2022, bizarre fight-ending injuries in headline fights in the UFC. Prior to that, he had lost his title to Glover Teixeira. That was last October. Prior to that, of course, had been his title reign and a 5-fight win streak. He's going to look to regain that title, not an interim title, but an undisputed vacated title against Ankalaev, the 30-year-old Dagestani, 17-1 overall, 9-1 in the UFC. He lost his debut, of course, got tapped out at the literal last second of the fight by Paul Craig in a fight he had otherwise been dominating. Since then, it's been back on the dominance train with no stops and no detours, as he has blown through Marcin Prachnio, Klidson Abreu, Dalcha Lungiambula, Iwan Kutalaba twice, Nikita Krylov, Volkan Oezdemir, Thiago Santos, and Anthony Smith. The most recent of those, the Smith victory, was back in July at UFC 277. He punched Smith out in the second round. Ankalaev is a comfortable favorite here. He is minus 250, Blachowicz plus 210 on the comeback. Keith, it's a title fight. However we got here, Blachowicz has a chance to join people like John Jones as two-time UFC light heavyweight champions. He's not favored. You heard me kind of stumble over it during the intro. He is a full year and a half older than I thought he was. I thought he was 38. He turns 40 in February. Light heavyweight, it's not heavyweight, but it's the next best thing, where your late 30s for a lot of fighters kind of is your prime. And, well, hell, Glover Teixeira was about ready to fight for a title at age 42 or 43 or whatever he is. Longevity is possible, but at some point there has to be some fall off. Do you think it's happening here? And give me your prediction for the fight.
Yeah, if Jan Blachowicz wins this fight, you mentioned that he'll join John Jones as a two-time light heavyweight champ, Randy Couture, another two-time, and it was Daniel Cormier. He was the only one, right? Because he lost the belt, but they gave it back to him, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, because of the no contest against John Jones the second time. So kind of Daniel Cormier if we count him. That's a hell of a group to be with, though. John Jones, Randy Couture, and maybe Daniel Cormier. I was surprised by the lines. I'm not surprised that Ankalaev is the favorite. I'm surprised that he was that big of a favorite. If I had to guess, I would have guessed like negative 190 or negative 180. Negative being, I think you said negative 250. That was surprising.
250.
Yeah, that was surprising. Being that this is the best fighter that Ankalaev has ever faced. Jan Blachowicz, he can fight at both stances, but I think he's better off in the orthodox stance. He's a boxer that keeps everything tight. Good jab. I mean, legendary hook. Big power. He does well to work the body. A lot of hand fighting. We saw that against Corey Anderson, where he kind of like won positions with his hand to set up his power shots. He generates so much power because he stays like very compressed, and he keeps his base underneath him. Very similar to when Michael Chandler landed Victor, when he's not overextended, when he's kind of like sidestepping and getting inside and using his legs. That's kind of what's similar to what Jan Blachowicz does. He can starch anybody. He really can. He can starch anybody in the division. I mean, Corey Anderson, Dominic Reyes, Luke Rockhold, like those are all good examples of guys he just put out with big shots. But in fairness, two of those fights didn't age that well, Reyes and Rockhold. But the Corey Anderson, I mean, not as good as it did a month ago, but still, that's a really good win. His kicks are the best part of his game. Especially his calf kicks. I shouldn't say the best part of his game, but it's a nice compliment to those, like that legendary hook. You know, he can grind inside. He's really good, like using his size to dirty box. He can land like close, powerful strikes in close areas. I mean, the perfect example is the Luke Rockhold fight. Like he landed that shot as they were breaking from grappling. He's an underrated offensive wrestler. I mean, he defended his title against Israel Adesanya using his wrestling. I mean, he was a much bigger guy, but it's something that it used to be a weakness of Jan Blachowicz. Now he's underrated grappler. He had no answer to Glover Teixeira in stopping takedowns and in grappling, but we've seen him like catch submissions on Nikita Krylov. But he looked tough against Glover Teixeira, but I think that just says more about Glover Teixeira than Jan Blachowicz, and I think he got a little frustrated at times with how easily Glover Teixeira took him down. Ankalaev is huge for the weight class. I mean, he's a technically sound southpaw. He reminds me, the way he fights, he reminds me a lot of Sean Strickland without like wacky sound bites of Sean Strickland. And what I mean about
any sound bites.
Yeah. That's true. Ankalaev doesn't talk too. What I mean by that is the big part of his game is his jab, and he points with it. All his power punches, which he has. I mean, obviously Anthony Smith can tell you that. That's a secondary part of his game. It's about working the jab, working the distance, making you have a hard time getting by the jab to kind of get to land your own shots. Though he can fight at a snail's pace. He can, and it concerns me. We haven't seen it, but it concerns me because I think we could have some close rounds because of that in fights where he is the better fighter, or he can actually even give away rounds because his refusal to kind of really pick up the pace. But we've seen guys who will work a jab and lose fights. Jorge Masvidal's guy we talked about in the past. Bobby Green's a guy like that where they kind of they're not landing on me, and I'm doing, I'm just jabbing, I'm winning. We haven't seen that happen to Ankalaev, but I'm concerned that it could happen to him if he doesn't pick up the pace. He has defensive flaws. Like he's technically sound, but he does keep his chin a little high. He doesn't, he doesn't roll well. He's kind of a little stiff, but he's got a really good kicking game. I mean, his teep kicks up the middle. He's got great high kicks. I mean, it's been a while now. We go back to like the Kudalaba fight. We just like unloads. The first Kudalaba fight, we unloads like 5 high kicks in a row, just landing them. He has some of the best calf kicks in the game. He does well to actually check leg kicks himself. But that was his strike game. He has a whole wrestling game too, and that's actually where he came in the UFC on, was on his wrestling. He can get in the clinch and just grind in there. He has one thing about him is I talked about him fighting at a snail's pace on the feet. He'll do it in the grappling too. Like he does not care. He'll get in, he'll clinch, he'll use his size, he'll like use really good head positioning and frustrate his opponents, and he doesn't give a shit if the entire arena is booing him. Like that's how he wins. He's going to do it. He doesn't care. From there, he'll like drop down on the hips. He can shoot. He can shoot, especially when he backs up his opponent. He'll shoot in the hips. More of like a clinch wrestler, though. He gets on top. He's got really good top control, really good top game. Knows to pin his opponent down and kind of control position before he starts landing punishment. But when he does, he has really good ground and pound. Though, and you mentioned this, his one sole loss was when he was got a little lazy in the guard and got caught by Paul Craig. He's extremely hard to take down. I don't think he's been taken down in the UFC. I could be wrong. I don't think he's been taken. I don't think anybody's really.
I'm trying to think if anyone's tried.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like, I don't know if anybody's tried. It might be because it's not often Russians get taken down. I don't remember him really being in trouble other than moments against Paul Craig. So, as far as prediction go, I did say that I think the line should be closer. And now I'm kind of second guessing myself. And I think I was saying it should be closer because I respect Jan Blachowicz. I mean, he's a true top 3, top 4 guy in the division. He's good. He's got like an equalizer and power. But when you really break it down stylistically, I really see 2 avenues victory for Blachowicz, and that's one, landing a big blow, landing that one big shot, which is. It sounds like, I hate to say, oh, he's got the puncher's chance. Yeah, that's what an elite power punching light heavyweight does. It's like, it'd be like watching a football game, be like, oh, you got Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady. Like, oh, the only chance is to throw the ball. Well, that's a pretty good chance for those guys, So I think don't glaze over what I'm saying. Like, I'm not downplaying that. Like, it's a very big opportunity. I'm just concerned I've never seen Ankalaev hurt. Again, you could argue this is definitely the power. Like, I mean, who hits harder than Jan Blachowicz that Ankalaev has faced?
He went 5 rounds with Thiago Santos. He lost 2 of those rounds.
Okay.
I mean, Santos hit him.
Yeah, it's a different Santos, though. Like,
yeah, I mean, I agree, but I'm saying, like,
yeah, fair enough. No, yeah, he wasn't. Yeah, he wasn't hurt. He wasn't really hurt. And he gave. So that was actually a good example of a fight that he gave around. So that fight was so bad I blocked it on my memory, which was a 5-round main event. Right? Yeah, it was main event. Yeah. That shows you how much I blocked it on my memory. And I just did tape study on this guy. So, but that's an example of a fight where, like, if you just poked up the volume, that shouldn't have been even a close fight. And the other thing that I think would be an avid victory for Blachowicz is if he just kicks out the calves, just targets the calves, kicks out the calves, moves, kicks out the calves. But Ankalaev, if you want to get a kicking game, Ankalaev's going to use those longer range of kicks, and he blocks those. So I see Ankalaev jabbing. I see Ankalaev throwing some long distance kicks. I can see him getting into the clinch, working the clinch. I can see him maybe even getting a takedown. I think Ankalaev wins a title. I think it's going to be like a very, like, not exciting to talk about on the recap show. We were on Ankalaev before it was popular to be on Ankalaev. We were doing this guy the next. We were saying this 2 years ago, 2.5 years, whatever. It's been a long time when we were saying this. So I've never picked against him. I haven't picked him. I'm not picking against him now. Give me Ankalaev to win the title by decision.
We've previewed a lot of Ankalaev fights together. One thing about him is he stays busy. I mean, I think we've previewed like seven Ankalaev fights at this point, and he stays busy. You pointed out like his greatest weakness. Like, his greatest weakness is his deliberate approach, because it feels as though he's dominated every fight he's been in. But in reality, he's dropped a couple rounds. He lost 2 rounds to Thiago Santos. He lost 1 round on at least one judge's scorecard to Klidson Abreu, of all people, like way back almost 4 years ago. And here's the thing. There was 1 round, I think it was either round 2 or round 3, is the only round that I think he flat out lost. Like, the other guy beat him that round. Like, Santos landed more punches, and they were just as hard as his. Like, Santos just flat out won that round, 10-9. The rest of the rounds he's lost were just shitty rounds where it was impossible to, like, really pick one guy because he just nobody put their stamp on the round. There is no excuse for a fighter as physically gifted and as skilled as Magomed Ankalaev to leave rounds in doubt against Klidson Abreu or the, like, at this point, pretty shot Thiago Santos. So it's probably how he's going to lose his next fight whenever that happens. Whenever that happens, it'll be a Jones-Reyes or Jones-Santos type thing where it's an ultra-close decision, it's a splitter, and it just happens to go the way of the other fighter, and there'll be no one Ankalaev can blame but himself. But I don't think this is when that happens. And I think once Ankalaev has the title, I mean, most fighters' reaction to winning a UFC title, just in terms of having the prestige, having the gold, having the pay bump that comes with that, is to become more conservative, both in their career strategy and then in their in-fight strategy within the fight.
God, please don't do that, Ankalaev.
Like, I mean, just within the last couple of months, people were kind of bemoaning, oh, fine, the Islam Makhachev era is finally here, because the fights were going to get a lot more boring. And I mean, you and I talked about it on that recap, like and I said, the guy that beats Makhachev isn't even in the UFC right now. Is what I think I said. And I mean, I might have been caught up in the moment, but
sure,
it's entirely possible. He could just clean house.
The guy who beats Makhachev might be in the UFC, just might not have been in the division. Oh, anyways,
I'm picking up what you're putting down, and I can't wait for that preview. The Makhachev era has nothing on the Ankalaev era.
Yeah,
like what we're about to get. It's almost a shame that the belt will not be passed directly from Prochazka to Ankalaev in a fight there, because at the moment that happened, like, the entire temperature of the earth would drop about 10 degrees and like humanity would start to die out just from the loss of energy at in the UFC light heavyweight division. Like, there'd be rolling blackouts throughout like Las Vegas or wherever it took place. But yeah, Ankalaev is going to fight his usual conservative game plan. Blachowicz has exactly the avenues to victory that you mentioned. And if Ankalaev just decides to start taking Blachowicz down, it could just be the Teixeira fight without the finish, which would be, ugh.
Yeah.
But yeah, give me Ankalaev by decision. 49-46, because there'll be one round where they each land 5 strikes, but Blachowicz lands a harder one.
Yeah, it might be the first round.
Yeah, it might be the first round. And yeah, and the champ is dead. Long live the champ. That's it for the Sherdog Radio Network preview for UFC 282, Blachowicz versus Ankalaev. I've been your host, Ben Duffy. He's been Keith Shillan. If this is your first time watching us, first of all, thank you. We hope you've enjoyed it. We do these for every UFC card and selected other cards, and we think we give about as good a deep dive as you'll find in the game, along with a little bit of cutting up, some historical asides, and at least one mention of Bo Nickal per show. Here it's appropriate because he actually was supposed to fight on this card. Dang it. Please do like, subscribe, leave us a comment. Keith and I both man the comment section. We'd love to hear your takes on these fights. If you think we're out of our gourds on any of these, we'll definitely get in there with you and have the conversation. But most importantly, join us on the recap. We recap every UFC event live about 15 minutes after the main event ends on the Sherdog YouTube page, where you might be watching this right now. Keith takes the captain's chair. We'll talk about all 14 of these fights in reverse order, just starting with the main event, working all the way down, give out a few awards, and talk about what was good, what was bad, what was surprising, what was controversial. There's always something. And the comment section, the live chat is wide open there. So we have quite a few listeners who are giving their own takes on the fights, asking questions. We'd love you to join them. It's a vibrant community, and it's just kind of cool to hang out for a couple hours after the fights. Between now and then, thank you once again for listening. Enjoy the rest of your week, and by all means, enjoy the fights.